On his 18th birthday, a young lad, an animal tamer, was to be given a unique ability that had to be useful in any case. After all people believed that a comfortable life should start with having good skills. But then the young man was a bit shocked when he was informed that he was to be banished not only from his home, but also from his hometown. But in order to understand what exactly led to this, you dear and beloved viewers, you need to dive into this fascinating story from the very beginning. I advise you to spend time with pleasure together with the heroes of this story, and do not forget to appreciate our labors. In this magical world, when a person turns 18 years old, he does not have the opportunity to choose his ability. The young worker Alt, a monster tamer in the royal palace, had been looking forward to this moment, and now he finally got his ability. Alt's father, a nobleman, was furious because to summon a monster required spending 1,000,000 gold coins, and Alt didn't even know which monster would fall out. Alt tried to explain that it was all God Gachai and offered to look at his status in the form of a magic book that rated his abilities. The skill he received was called God of Gachai, and it allowed him to summon a random messenger of the divine attribute, but provided there was 1,000,000 gold coins, and that didn't please his father. The overly thrifty and cunning aristocrat was angry and accused Alta of wanting to destroy his Austin family. His father confessed that he always had a bad feeling about it, because Alt's head was always full of cursed monsters and he didn't think at all about the future of his family. But Alt disagreed and reminded that the monsters of the royal court were protecting the city, and it was a very important job for a member of the Austin family. The Count didn't want to hear anything. After all, for 1,000,000 gold pieces, he could have built a great mansion instead of summoning a possibly useless monster. In the end, his father suggested that Alt prove the usefulness of his skill of summoning divine creatures, and then maybe his opinion would change. The Count asked to raise the necessary sum and give Alt a chance to prove himself. But Alt was unsure of himself and afraid of possible failure, and admitted that he might not be able to live up to his father's expectations. As a result, the angry father called his son a scoundrel and asked him to leave home immediately. Alt was shocked and asked what would happen to his monsters. Alt reminded that he knows the characteristics of all the monsters in the royal palace, and if they stop listening to him, he will lose his trust. But his father advised him not to worry about that and said that Namakel, Alt's own brother, had gotten the monster tamer skill, and so he could handle the job just as well as Alt. His father explained that this way he would gain an advantage over the surrounding nations, and Namakel would take much better care of the preservation and development of the county than the irresponsible Alt. In the end, the Count provided a chest with 1,000,000 gold coins and offered to change Alt's mind. But the guy was upset and worried a lot, because if he summoned a terrible dragon, then it could bring mortal danger not only to his home, but even to the entire kingdom. But then Alt decided that even if the monster was too dangerous, he could subdue it to his will, and then everything would be fine. And it wouldn't be a bad idea to summon someone really impressive. And after this success, it would be possible to get his father's recognition and continue to live a peaceful life in his homeworld. Filled with hope, Alt activated his Gachai God skill, and suddenly a strange disc appeared in the room. Alt did not know what was going on, and then read that the first time he activated the skill of the God Gacha, he was guaranteed to receive a Goddess of SSR rank, and could now read the detailed instructions. The instructions had a huge list of all sorts of divine existences that were incredibly powerful, so there was hope to summon someone outstanding. Alt hoped for the best and didn't regret the loss of 1,000,000 gold coins at all. After activating the summoning skill of the God Gachai, a bright flash erupted in the room, which formed a veritable pillar of pulsating magical energy. After a few seconds, someone's foot appeared out of the blinding light, and everyone in the room was curious to see who Alt had actually summoned. As soon as the summoning was complete, the light disappeared and a lovely young girl, who was the fertility goddess Rudia, appeared on the disc. Alt was puzzled, for he had expected to summon a powerful monster, but he had summoned an ordinary-looking human and realized that his father would not like it. But then the surprise became even greater when a beautiful girl rushed to hug Alt and said that she had missed him very much. The fertility goddess continued to hug the guy and talk about how long she had waited for this meeting and how good it was for her to be in this world. Alt tried to break out of the embrace and asked how Rudia even knew him, since they hadn't met before. The Count was as surprised as his son and asked in an angry voice what kind of divine monster was this 1,000,000 gold monster, because she didn't look like a creature with mighty power. In the end, his father's anger was expressed by ordering Alt to leave his house, and even more, to leave the city. Alt took his father's words hard, for he did not fully believe that he would really be driven out of the home where he had spent 18 years of his life. The Count granted Alt the border territory of Silesia and ordered him not to return until he had lived up to his name. Thus the young monster tamer became a homeless and banished son of the Count. Alt was trying to realize his situation and it was very depressing. Rudia noticed the lad's condition and tried to talk. The goddess of fertility asked to listen to her and explained that the Count was wrong and should not blame himself for what had happened. Therefore, Alt should not be discouraged, because there was still a whole life ahead of him and one could achieve anything. But Alt replied that he can't blame his father and should follow his orders, because parents are always right. Rudia realized at this moment that the young monster tamer was too kind and naive guy. Alt then asked the girl who she even was and why she looked like she owned everything around her and maybe she was actually some kind of monster. Rudia was outraged and exclaimed, "How could you even say such insulting words to a beautiful girl?" and offered to evaluate her body. Alt choked at the suggestion and instantly blushed with embarrassment. Rudia then explained that she was a fertility goddess and had been summoned by Alt using her skill by the god Gachai. And despite this being their first meeting in this world, she would serve the man who had called her into this world. Rudia began to promise any help for any problems, and this made Alt feel his face begin to burn treacherously again. Then the beautiful goddess explained that he should not regret the money spent, because Alt had not only gotten a great assistant, but also inherited some of her abilities and offered to check the status menu. Alt, reading his status, really learned that he now had an ability called World Tree Drops, and by creating such magical drops you can restore life and magical energy, as well as heal all kinds of wounds. It is also possible to resurrect the dead within 24 hours of death. It was always assumed that a person could only acquire one unique skill at the age of 18, and Alt acquired the ability of the god Gachai. But gaining the ability to regain full physical and magical health as well as the ability to raise the dead shocked Alt, for this was something he had not expected. It was truly incredible and Alt began to realize the possibilities that could open up to him. Rudia asked if Alt was speechless when he saw his new abilities thanks to her. The fertility goddess then told how 2,000 years ago the elves had paid her a huge tribute to get the ability to drop the world tree. And so one must realize how valuable a skill it was. But unfortunately 2,000 years ago during the War of the Seven Great Demon Kings all the gods lost their power and fell into a deep sleep. But in the end, the trump card for the resurrection of the gods is the ability of the god Gachai, which was recently obtained by Alt. The boy only smiled in response and said that it was too huge for him, and he was not even a nobleman anymore. Alt reminded that now he couldn't even return to his hometown and how such an insignificant person could influence the fate of other people and even more so the divine creatures. Alt explained to the fertility goddess that most likely his own brother had acquired strong skills and now he would have to go to Silesia and live there quietly so as not to bother his father anymore. As it turned out, Alt was happy with this opportunity. It allowed him to be a free man and no longer spend his time doing tedious work in the palace. Alt said that now he could do whatever he wanted in his life without having to answer to his father. Suddenly there was a shouting of people and a growling of the beast, and then people started calling for help to the adventurers. As it turned out, for unknown reasons, a monster wolf appeared on the streets of the city and attacked some people. In just a matter of seconds, several men and one woman were hurt. Alt was shocked by what was happening and his body began to tremble with excitement and fear. The goddess of fertility noticed the boy's condition and asked if he was alright. Finally, the young monster tamer rushed to the aid of the common people, which surprised and delighted Rudia. He jumped down from the high balcony and rushed to the monster. Quickly reaching the huge wolf, Alt pounced on the monster and began to order it to stop attacking the humans. Alt tried to restrain the animal and grabbed the wolf by its huge muzzle. The monster resisted and tried to break free, while the wolf growled and behaved threateningly. But Alt, despite his young age, was an experienced monster tamer and tried to subdue the wolf as quickly as possible. The boy began to convince the animal that everything was really alright and he was on his side, and therefore no one would harm him. The wolf still growled and tried to break free, but still began to listen to the words of the man. Alt felt that the monster began to calm down a little and continued to convince the wolf that no one would harm him, but only help him. After a few seconds, the tired animal gave up and lay down on the ground, but still growling and howling quietly. It was another success for Alta, and people were grateful for his courage. Then the young monster tamer took out a bundle of meat from his bag and offered the white wolf to eat and calm down a bit, because it was obvious that he was very hungry. The huge monster immediately pounced on the fresh meat, which confirmed Alta's assumption about his hunger. The guy was pleased with the result, because feeding the monster is the main criterion for its taming. Just at that moment, the goddess Rudia came running down from the balcony and came running down the street. As it turned out, the girl saw a wounded resident nearby and reported that he urgently needed help. In addition to the easily injured people, there was one woman who was unconscious. The woman had hit her head hard and was bleeding profusely, which could not be stopped even with healing magic. And with every second she was getting closer to death. Next to the woman was her young daughter, who was sobbing and begging her mother to wake up and not die. Alt was shocked by the horrible scene and was well aware that a few more minutes of such heavy bleeding would be decisive in this woman's life, and if nothing was done, she would simply die without regaining consciousness. The people of the town immediately recognized Alta, for he was a famous monster tamer. The guy calmed the girls and explained that the white wolf was under his control and would not harm anyone else. Alt himself considered the wounded woman and tried to quickly think of how to help her. The young monster tamer doubted that he would be allowed in the courtyard where the best healers were, since he had been banished by his father's will. The baby's cries only added to the excitement, and Alt kept going over his options. Finally, the boy exclaimed that he would immediately call the palace wizard, and if the adventurers could not use magic, they should use their skills to immediately prepare water and bandages. The locals and the few adventurers immediately began to organize themselves and promised to prepare everything they needed. But Rudia, the goddess of fertility, grabbed the boy by the arm and asked him not to run away, and then explained that he himself was capable of helping this wounded woman. Alt was very surprised and looked carefully at the goddess, who was extremely serious. The young monster tamer shifted his gaze to the excited people and the crying girl who was begging to save her mother, and unexpectedly reminded Alt of his birthday. Alt felt different, and the goddess Rudia urged him to trust his new skills. Alt had the courage to approach the people and declared that he would help the wounded woman himself. Concentrating magical energy, the young monster tamer summoned a drop from the world tree, and after a few seconds of effort, a crystal clear drop appeared from his hands. The magical liquid fell on the injured woman's head and slowly rolled down her tired face. The little daughter was surprised and looked hopefully at her mother. Suddenly, a bright light literally burst out of the woman, who was still lying unconscious, and this surprised the locals and even scared some of them. Alt was also very surprised at the first manifestation of the world tree drop and felt incredibly warm rays of bright light. As the magical glow faded, it became noticeable that the deep wound on the woman's head was healing, and it was a true miracle that no one expected. After a few seconds, the wounded girl regained consciousness and tried to understand what was even happening. People marveled at the woman's magical healing, and the little girl started hugging her mother. Alt was happy with his success and rejoiced with the others. A man's life was saved, and the young monster tamer struggled to control his emotions and realize what an incredible skill he possessed. The goddess Rudia was also pleased with her master's success, and the locals immediately appreciated Alta's skill in taming the white wolf, as well as his new skill that allowed him to heal the doomed woman. Meanwhile, the white wolf finished eating the meat and looked guiltily at his tamer. Alt was pleased with the result and promised the monster that all would be well now, for the result of his aggression had been corrected. After his success, Alt left the confines of his hometown and decided that today was a good enough day for such an event, especially since he couldn't fix anything now that he had become an outcast to his own father. The white wolf followed his master, and Alt decided to name the monster Snowball, for his white thick fur resembled a snowball. Goddess Rudia was outraged that Snowball's former tamer had abandoned him, for it was irresponsible and very foolish to do that to such dangerous monsters. Rudia then explained to the white wolf that his new master was a very good and kind person, and that was why he was lucky to be with them. Snowball reacted to the girl's words with an approving bark and a wag of his fluffy tail. The animal was really happy to be near good people, and before leaving the city, Snowball even managed to apologize to the frightened child and the wounded woman. Alt assumed that the reason for the white wolf's aggression was banal hunger, because he looked very thin, so he hadn't eaten for a long time and was angry with people. Alt promised that he would be fine now, because he did not want this to happen to animals and was ready to do his best. Rudia was surprised at the guy's attitude towards animals, and Alt explained that it was normal for him to be close to monsters, because he had been working as a tamer for a long time and could understand the emotions of different creatures. Especially today's incident reminded him of an important dream. The guy confessed that he sincerely wants to create a real paradise, where monsters can live freely and happily together with humans and never show aggression. It would be very desirable to achieve that all living creatures can get along together, but so far it remains just a dream, which should be gradually approached. Alt explained to the goddess that today everything had happened thanks to her, and that surprised Rudia. He explained that her words had instilled confidence and strength in him, and as a result he had been able to save the wounded woman and calm the adventurers who were ready to kill the white wolf. Alt stated that the fact that people were able to forgive Snowball was the first step to realizing his cherished dream, and he was grateful for the opportunity. All of this was due to the skills that the goddess Rudia had acquired, which meant that she was also the one who had participated in the realization of this dream. The gratitude of the young monster tamer was a surprise for the goddess of fertility, and the girl did not even know how to react to such frank and kind words. In the end, the excited girl tried to kiss Alta and called him a nice guy, whom she was ready to help in everything and always. The goddess Rudia immediately offered her help in other matters, but this embarrassed Alta too much, and he asked the girl to calm down and explained that he only wanted to express his gratitude. The exiled son of the count then stated that they were going to the border region of Silesia, and would definitely build a new city there. They would also have to face unimaginable hardships, and he was glad that goddess Rudia would be with him. The goddess of fertility promised to follow Alt anywhere and said that now they are engaged, which means she will help in any endeavor of the guy. The young monster tamer thanked the goddess for her agreement to follow him into the unknown, but said that he didn't quite understand what engagement was about, because he hadn't made any such promises. But Rudia, as it turned out, had made up her mind for the two of them and was not going to change her plan. Having traveled a considerable distance on the first day of the journey, the friends decided to spend the night in a small grove and continue their journey in the morning. Snowball turned out to be a very intelligent and obedient pet, who was happy to help his new master and let him ride him. Goddess Rudia called Alt a very good monster tamer, for it was evident by the white wolf's behavior and attitude. But Alt asked not to overestimate his abilities and reminded the goddess that they had only met just today. But Rudia disagreed with this statement and said that she had known Alt for 2,000 years and was aware of many details. Then the goddess suddenly began to pull out some object hidden on her chest and greatly embarrassed Alta. Rudia explained that she was holding a sacred stone, the very bonus for entering. Alt didn't quite understand what the goddess meant, and Rudia explained that her love was in crystallized form, and if Alt had 5 of those stones, he could trigger the god Gachai's skill once. The boy was very surprised, and the goddess decided that Alt was impressed by the beauty of her love. The monster tamer decided to clarify and inquired that would he not need to spend a whole 1,000,000 gold coins in such a case. The goddess confirmed, and then explained that Alt would be able to summon in rarity R creatures and below for free. This was great news for Alt, and then it was revealed that if he could accumulate 1,000,000 gold coins, he would then be able to summon SSR rank creatures. But Alt decided not to take such an expensive gift and use it to pay for the summoning he had already done. But the goddess Rudia was outraged and stated that she was so happy to see Alt today that she was able to produce 3 magic stones, even though she can usually only produce 1 per day. Rudia began to explain that Alt shouldn't be a weakling and use her abilities more strongly. The boy did not respond to the urging of the overly outspoken girl, and explained that he wanted to sleep very badly. But then, a little calmed down, the goddess asked if Alt knew who the Demon King was. The young monster tamer didn't know the details, and Rudia explained that the Demon King of this world was the ruler and leader of evil, and the only way to resurrect the sealed gods before the Demon Lord appears is to taunt the gods. Therefore, Alt should not argue, but should accept the magic stones in order to save the whole world. The boy was not too happy about such a responsible task, and eventually, putting away bad thoughts, was able to sleep. After 2 days of traveling, the friends found themselves on the border of Silesia, where a village of pioneers would be nearby. Alt explained that this territory was also known as the Sea of Demons, so they had to be very careful. As they approached the settlement, it became clear that the village was being attacked by aggressive goblins who were eager to destroy everything in their path. The locals were brave and tried to hold off the goblins even at the cost of their lives as they continued to repel the countless attacks on the village. Goddess Rudia asked what they would do in this situation. Alt explained that goblins were demonic creatures and he wouldn't be able to tame them even with his skill. The guy realized that in any case, they had to get rid of these creatures somehow to try to save the village from total destruction. Alt asked the girl to hide in the forest and not come out until it was over. The worried goddess was worried about her master and warned him of the deadly danger, but Alt was determined and traveled to the village with the white wolf. Alt was immediately able to identify the ringleader among the many goblins and ordered the white wolf to attack the enemies. But the leader of the goblins turned out to be very agile and managed to avoid the blow, although he was surprised by such a bold attack of an unknown man. The villagers rejoiced at the new protector and began to ask each other who this guy on the white wolf was. The goblin leader immediately realized that he was the main target of the attack and ordered all his subordinates to immediately destroy the rider on the white wolf. At the same time, the goblins showed cunning and grabbed several hostages, promising to kill them and destroy the entire village if the stranger continued to try to attack their leader. A hail of stones and sharp arrows rained down on Alta, which was an unpleasant surprise for the young monster tamer. Goddess Rudia was scared for the boy and tried to warn Alt of the danger. Alt was unable to stay on his horse and fell to the ground under the barrage of rocks, hitting his entire body painfully. This emboldened the aggressive goblins, and their leader ordered the defiant man to be killed immediately. But Snowball was not going to back down and was determined to defend his master. Snowball began to quickly run around Alta and repel any attempts to attack the guy. The goblins couldn't break through and were getting hit hard by the White Wolf, losing their confidence in their own strength. Meanwhile, the main tower on the village was going up in flames, and the defenders were in a very difficult situation. The goblins rejoiced at their success and were already anticipating a great booty in the form of money and captives. The goddess of fertility could not watch what was happening and decided to intervene in the situation, which only frightened Alta. The goblins immediately noticed the girl, and the leader ordered to capture her immediately. But Rudia was very angry and asked Alta to immediately use his Gacha God skill. The girl shouted that Gacha is not just a billing skill, for it is a power that makes people and God happy and meant for everyone. Rudia declared that she would immediately give Alta today's entrance bonus and threw 5 magic stones to him. The young monster tamer instantly grabbed the stones and activated the God Gachai's ability. A bright pillar of magical light once again appeared out of nowhere, and Alt asked his skill to help him save the people of this village. This time the young monster tamer managed to get a rare divine creature, Dragon Bahamut. The goblins and villagers were shocked in the appearance of the huge monster, and Dragon Bahamut stated that since he was summoned to this world, he should be allowed to destroy Mr. Alt's enemies, and he was ready to use his power. Alt remembered that he had once heard how this divine dragon was the strongest creature created by the creator god to oppose the Demon King, and his fire destroyed anyone in its path. Alt shouted that the goblins should not be burned, because they had a hostage and she would die too, so Bahamut should not act in full force. The huge dragon calmed Alt and explained that his divine fire breath can destroy only those fools who oppose his master, and therefore only vile goblins who try to harm people will die in the hot flames. The goblins immediately realized that they were doomed and dropped their weapons and began to beg for mercy. But the divine dragon did not listen to the goblins' pleas and promised to destroy all those who dared to point their weapons at his master. Suddenly, Alt intervened in the situation and asked Bahamut to wait a bit. Realizing that now the irreparable will happen and the divine dragon will really destroy the number of goblins, Alt ordered Bahamut to disappear, and the monster instantly returned to where he came from. After the disappearance of the divine dragon, a special card with Bahamut's image on it was in the hands of the young monster tamer. But the goblins continued to kneel, realizing that the monster could return at any second and then they would definitely die. The goblins, led by their leader, bowed to Alt and welcomed him back, calling the guy Gob, which meant to show respect to the goblins. Alt was surprised by this reaction, but was glad that he was able to stop the bloodshed and save the village from destruction. The monster tamer also realized that the magic card in his hand was meant to carry summoned monsters and meant it should be kept with him at all times. Rudia explained that this was indeed true, and the god Gacha stops after being summoned. The consequences of being able to summon again and again a monster that had already appeared in this world. However, summoning monsters again required 100 units of magic energy and 1 unit per minute to maintain the summoning. After examining his statistics, Alt realized that his maximum amount of magic energy was currently 120 units and he needed to develop and increase it. Rudia explained that it was most important to understand when and where to summon monsters and reminded him that the recovery of magical energy was complete. Alt thanked the goddess for the hint because he had forgotten that she could also use the World Tree Drop ability. After thinking for a while, Alt asked if he understood correctly that Rudia could also be turned into a card like Bahamut. The girl used an assumption and explained that she actually wants to be with Alt in normal form for as long as possible. And she also has the independent action skill, that unique skill that doesn't use up magical energy even if she's summoned. Rudia admitted that she would be very tearful and upset if Alt turned her into a card and put her in his pocket. The boy promised to do so and thanked the girl for her help, for if it weren't for her, he would hardly be able to cope with such difficulties. Rudia was embarrassed by Alta's kind words, but also sincerely wished for more. Meanwhile, the frightened goblins gathered their courage and decided to talk to Alt, explaining that they didn't expect to see such a terrifying monster. The young monster tamer explained to the goblins that he was not going to destroy them at all, but if they continued to attack humans, then they would definitely get the punishment they deserved. although even if they don't continue their crimes, they have already destroyed and stolen a lot and are still guilty. Goblins immediately returned everything they had managed to steal and promised to pay for all their destructions, because the main thing is not to destroy them. Alt believed the goblins and offered to help the people. The goblin leader was ready for any conditions and agreed to help. Finally, satisfied with the negotiations with the goblins, Alt decided to address everyone present and asked for some attention. Alt introduced himself and explained that he had been appointed Lord of the Land to turn the area into a rich city where monsters and humans could coexist together. The villagers had heard the name Alt Austin before and knew that this guy was a royal monster tamer, so they decided that the terrible dragon belonged to him and that was a sign of true greatness. Then Alt explained that the goblins had admitted their guilt and were ready to do everything in their power for the future development of the city and to compensate for all the damage they had caused. Alt asked everyone to become true friends from now on and to build a good new city together. Meanwhile, the goblin leader announced that they had brought the looted money and their approximately 1 million gold coins. Goddess Rudia immediately tried to appropriate all the money for herself and began to persuade Alta to use her Gachai God skill. Rudia explained that if one paid with this money to use the skill, one would be able to summon even more amazing divine beings that would be stronger even than the dragon Bahamut. It would also be possible to get a super talented boss. Alt disagreed with this decision and tried to voice his opinion. The young monster tamer explained that the money belonged to the villagers and so he would earn money gradually with his abilities. Meanwhile, the fire in the village was still blazing and if it continued like this, the flames could spread to the forest. The goblins continued to apologize for what they had managed to destroy and began to quickly draw water from the nearby river. But Goddess Rudia rushed to calm everyone down and stated that Master Alt would quickly solve the problem and neutralize the fire in the village. Rudia explained to the lad that he could use his Bahamut skills properly. The divine dragon's ability allowed him to burn only the target and not damage elements not needed. Alt immediately realized this and asked everyone to move to a safe distance, and then use the divine flame skill. After a few seconds, the unbelievable happened. Bahamut's divine fire was able to neutralize the normal flames in the village and the fire stopped, leaving only thick smoke behind. Meanwhile, in the distant dungeon of Purgatory, young Count Namakel Austin and his team of adventurers continued their quest to find Bahamut's dragon. Namakel, unlike his twin brother, was a rude and intemperate young man who constantly accused the adventurers of incompetence. Namakel would yell and demand to move faster so that he could find the dragon in time. One of the adventurers explained that there was no need to worry and the monster would be here soon. But the rude Namakel didn't want to listen to anyone and kept calling the adventurers who should show him the right way. Namakel once again reminded that he was the aristocrat with the strongest dragon tamer skill, and so the adventurers should carry him in their arms if needed. One of the adventurers asked Namakel to behave more restrained and not to insult anyone, as it only spoils relationships during the expedition. But Count Namakel instantly became enraged and shouted that the adventurers were pathetic commoners and would surely be held accountable for their attempt to defy him. The girl adventurer complained to her brother that she could no longer tolerate such treatment. The fellow adventurer tried to calm the girl down and promised to make things right. Namakel, meanwhile, continued to say that everyone is obliged to listen to him, because he is a real aristocrat. But the leader of the adventurer team reminded him that the dungeon in front of them was a complex dungeon with danger level S, and asked the young count to calm down. The leader of the adventurer team also advised the young count to stop his insults, otherwise he would be forced to report to the adventurers guild and there would be serious consequences. But Namakel didn't want to listen to anyone and started swinging his sword again, promising the adventurers to kick them out of the guild, because he has power in the city and can influence many things. The adventurers were annoyed and insulted by the foolish count and reminded him that his brother Alt had become a great dragon tamer and always showed respect for other people. Namakel got even angrier after mentioning his brother, but at that moment a threatening voice was heard, which made the young brute shut up. At that moment, the divine dragon Bahamut appeared from behind a huge rock and asked who dared to disturb him. Namakel shouted that he was a dragon tamer and had come here to be a master for Bahamut. The young earl began to command the divine dragon, which only made the monster laugh. Bahamut shouted that the foolish young man should know his place and immediately get the hell out of here while he was still alive. Namakel instantly flew aside and slammed his face into the stone with all his might, smashing his nose bloody. The adventurers quietly watched the disgrace of the count, who complained of severe pain and a broken nose. Namakel asked for help and one of the adventurers advised the count to calm down and promised to stop the bleeding. But at that moment, far more important problems were approaching the adventurers. The divine dragon Bahamut was enraged by the insolence of the humans who had disturbed his peace and dared to order him around. The adventurers noticed that in a few seconds a terrible flame would engulf them and hurried to get out of the affected area immediately. The team of adventurers rushed to escape, completely forgetting about the foolish count who kept shouting and demanding to help him. The adventurers didn't want to sacrifice their lives for a man who constantly insulted and humiliated them. The divine dragon began to taunt the foolish count and asked how he felt about being thrown to certain doom. Namical realized that now he would surely perish, but at that moment Bahamut postponed killing Namical and said that he had been called by his true master. Bahamut advised the count to thank his master for saving his life. Namical, drenched in tears, asked if the dragon had been summoned by some summoner, and made so simple. Namical couldn't believe it. Even he with his outstanding skills couldn't summon a dragon, and it would be nice to know who this person was. He continued to think about the man who could summon the divine dragon, and of course he didn't know at that moment that this man was his own brother. Alt, meanwhile, was busy building his new city and not thinking about the family that had banished him. All of Namical's hopes of using the dragon to control the other monsters had been dashed, and it made his situation much worse. As it turned out, the monsters of the royal palace had already begun to express their discontent and disobedience after losing Alta, so the authority of the Austin family was shaken. Namical, despite being Alta's twin, had a completely different character, but he was still able to obtain the Dragon Tamer skill and was very proud of it. Namical was confident that this ability would allow him to not only control dragons, but also tame lower-class creatures. His father was sure of this as well, who decided he had no use for Alt now and banished him from his family. But in the end, Alt decided that this was not so bad, because now he was a free man and was able to get to a remote village, which he decided to rebuild into the city of his dreams. Not only did Alt like this village, but also his friends, the goddess Rudia and the faithful white wolf Snowball. The first night after the goblin attack, a welcome party was thrown in the village for the new Lord Alta and his friends. It became a true celebration that brought goblins and humans together. Alt reflected that in addition to rebuilding the village and providing needed food, it was amazing to see how goblins and humans were able to forgive each other for past wrongs and sit at the same table in peace. One of the adult villagers suggested that Alta take a bottle of the best sake as a thank you and drink in honor of the feast. The villagers were indeed very happy that their new lord was a man who appeared to be able to subdue a real dragon. Everyone was filled with hope for the future and enjoyed the fact that the longtime enemies of the goblins were now friends. Alt did not turn down the opportunity to enjoy the local sake and decided that he was actually very lucky to be in this place, where he was able to unite humans and goblins, as well as become the tamer of the divine dragon. All of this was made possible by the ability of the god Gachai, and understanding this skill was largely made possible with the help of the beautiful goddess Rudia. The local food also pleased the young lord, for all the dishes looked no worse than the food in his native home. After tasting the food, Alt admitted that he liked it very much and thanked the locals for their care. But in fact, the local food was not salty at all, and there was no pepper in it. And if you looked more closely, there were almost no vegetables in the venison soup that the goblins had brought. In the end, Alt thanked for the delicious food, which pleased the local girl, who apparently cooked these dishes. At the same time, the young monster tamer noticed how the cheap alcohol quickly intoxicated everyone and began to make a lot of noise. Alt, watching everyone gain determination, and realized that there was still a lot to do to achieve his goal. Suddenly, however, Alt was disturbed by the drunken goddess Rudia, who started accusing him of looking at the local girls. Rudia behaved defiantly and declared that she was Alta's wife and therefore no woman should molest him under threat of her wrath. The young lord tried to resist and could not understand when he had time to marry Rudia. But all was in vain, and everyone believed in the words of the goddess and began to congratulate Alta on his very beautiful wife. Rudia was happy to hear the compliments and enjoyed the attention. Alt only watched the whole story unfold without his participation. In the end, the happy goddess of fertility promised to reward the villagers with a rich harvest, which surprised everyone present. Soon Rudia found a berry tree in the local garden, the fruit of which could be used as material for healing medicines. But since the land was infertile, the trees produced almost no crops. Goddess Rudia decided to remedy this situation, and with a single movement of her hand she was able to decorate the bare trees with bright dots of red berries. The resulting fruits delighted all humans and goblins alike. The berries were of course edible and very sweet, and so everyone immediately began to taste them and enjoy the incredible flavor. Alt also tasted the berries, and with resistance he felt his body fill with energy, because the quality of these fruits was very high. The locals could not believe what they were seeing, for never before had these trees produced such a bountiful harvest. Alt decided that these berries had a healing effect even if they were eaten plain. Therefore, such food was indispensable nutrition for adventurers. The young lord asked the goddess how often she could create such a crop. Rudia thought for a moment and explained that it could not be done too often, because the trees would get tired and the land would become unfertile. But once every 10 days it could be done without any negative consequences. Rudia herself was pleased with her ability to control the plants, and Alt realized that now there was no point in waiting for the berries to ripen and could pick them all year long. The young lord praised the girl for her divine abilities, but Rudia smilingly reminded him that she was a goddess who was ready to help her beloved spouse. The locals thanked the fertility goddess for her help with the harvest, and Rudia advised them to worship Alta more than her. The happy goddess explained that Alt was actually a savior who was the god's chosen creator. The lad was embarrassed by such words and advised to take it more lightly. The local alcohol burned his throat pleasantly, and a happy Alt thought it was a really good drink to relax and have fun with. The young lord was happy that in any case the huge problem of this village was suddenly solved, and it was a very good start for his reign. The next day first, Alt asked for help to build a barn for Snowball and ended up with a wonderful home for the White Wolf. Just at that moment, unexpectedly for the young lord, the White Wolf thanked his master in a human voice. Alt didn't immediately believe what he heard, but then he checked the status of his skills and found out that his monster tamer ability had been upgraded to level 11, allowing him to understand the language of monsters. This new ability allowed him to understand the words of any monsters that were even above the 11th level. Snowball was also excited about this ability, and immediately asked for a haircut as he was getting very hot. Alt decided to help his pet, and after a while, with the help of the locals, the excess fur was lying on the ground and the White Wolf felt light and fresh. Alt decided that in the future it would be possible to sell such valuable wool and earn money, and the joyful Snowball promised to protect all the villagers and began to ride the small children on his back. After that, Alta was found by the goddess Rudia and informed about the guests who had visited from the settlement. As it turned out, the guests were traders from the Innu tribe, and judging by the stories of the locals, they were quite honest traders who always showed their good mood by waving their tails. Alt thanked the traders for coming to this remote area and offered to enjoy their hospitality. The fellow also introduced himself and explained that he had recently taken over as the new lord of Silesia. Alt immediately realized that getting to know the merchants would allow for a trading relationship and asked to bring him a supply of food for the settlement on their next visit. The merchants were also happy to cooperate and promised to bring any goods that were needed. Alt explained that he had 1 million gold coins at his disposal and would like to receive the highest quality products from the royal suppliers. Such an order made the merchant's eyes widen several times, for he had not expected to hear about such a large amount of goods at all. Alt explained to the merchant that he wanted all the monsters under his leadership to have a good life, as they would likely increase in number soon. The merchant listened attentively and promised to help in this matter. After his request, Alt asked the merchant if he could sell his goods, and this interested the guest. The young lord offered the visiting merchant to buy medicinal fresh berries and white wolf fur from him. The group of traders checked with interest the offered goods, which turned out to be 3 boxes of each, and highly appreciated the quality of berries and wool. In the end, the chief merchant agreed to buy the whole lot. The merchant was really honest and explained that such white wolf wool had a high protective power, and the berries were of high quality at this time of year. Alt thanked the merchant for the information and for the good deal. Goddess Rudia watched with interest as the young monster tamer communicated and made his first lucrative deal as lord of this settlement. The merchant was pleased with his visit, for he was able to purchase out-of-season berries and make a contract for monster provisions. The merchant was also interested in the young lord, who was an excellent negotiator. The merchant then confessed that he couldn't believe to see such friendly goblins, because usually these creatures are too aggressive and dangerous. The goblin leader explained that the leader of this settlement came from a famous family of Austin aristocrats and used to work as a royal tamer. The merchants and even more pleased, because they greatly appreciated customers with such a high status and promised to fulfill any order. Alt was even embarrassed by the merchant's reaction and explained that he had actually lost touch with his parents' house, and although he was still called an aristocrat, it was just a title. Alt explained that when he turned 18 and the abilities he had gained were not very appealing to his father, he was exiled to this remote land, and so it was problematic for him to reconnect with his family. The merchant explained that the circumstances of what had happened were not important to him at all, and that he was willing to establish trade relations with Mr. Alt personally. The merchant confessed that he had a feeling that the young lord could turn the territory of Silesia into a rich, prosperous province, because they could see the prospect. Alt only laughed in response and thanked the merchants for their trust. After this meeting, the young lord, accompanied by his friends, went to the forest and told how good-natured a merchant that guy turned out to be. It was great that the berries had sold well, and with this amount of money, one could make a good profit and promote his gacha god ability. And now, thanks to Goddess Rudia's ability, one wouldn't have to worry about food. The goddess of fertility was able to create a field on which various crops began to grow to diversify the diet of the locals. Rudia was happy to help the young lord and advised him not to forget about his magical ability and use gacha. There had been quite a lot of events lately, and the goddess Rudia had become much more insistent in her desire to get closer to Alt. But the boy tried his best to ignore these suggestions and tried to sleep alone in his room. This activity of the goddess of fertility was noticed by the rest of the inhabitants of the settlement, and they understood the feelings that Rudia had for Alt. At some point, Snowball smelled something strange, and the young lord asked what was bothering the white wolf. As it turned out, Snowball was able to smell honey thanks to his keen sense of smell, and Alt asked for directions to the spring. Rudia was immediately happy to find honey. The girl was very fond of sweets. Alt himself was happy to find a useful resource that could be sold for a good price to traveling merchants. While talking to the trader, Alt explained that he was actually looking for a new industry, which puzzled the trader because he didn't expect any questions about industry. Alt explained that he would like to make something that would become a specialty of his settlement and make it famous throughout the country. One of the merchants suggested thinking about a honey bear, as it would be a good idea to develop his business, and such a commodity is perfectly valued anywhere and at any time of the year. The traders explained that such an animal lives in the Silesian forest near the settlement. As it turned out, the traders themselves had never met this beast, but they had heard about it many times from adventurers who had thoroughly explored this forest. And if it is possible to tame this monster, then Mr. Alt will be able to establish a large industry based on the production of honey. At the same time, the wandering merchant sold Alt the local territories for 1,000 gold coins and promised to become a regular buyer of future products for any price offered. The goddess Rudia was eagerly awaiting new discoveries and wanted to know what honey was. Alt explained the honey bear is a forest dweller and loves honey, so this animal has a habit of hoarding this sweet resource. And as the honey is stored, it becomes even sweeter and more valuable. But some goblins were afraid of a possible encounter with a bear because this animal seemed very huge, ferocious to them. Alt asked them not to worry and explained that he had already encountered such creatures, because all the honey used by the confectioners of the royal palace comes from these bears. This incredibly pleased the young goddess, who immediately imagined how they could prepare really delicious and sweet cakes, as well as many other sweets. The young lord promised that if things went well, he would be able to sell honey at a good price, but first they would have to find and tame a honey bear. Joyful Rudia began to imagine what kind of sweets she would be able to taste, for honey could be used to make anything. Meanwhile, Snowball, the white wolf, heard the sweet smell even more strongly and pointed in the right direction. Soon they came out of the dense thickets of the forest and saw a huge glade covered with bright flowers with a sweet fragrance. Everyone was delighted by what they saw, for the variety of colors amazed even the goblins. A huge beehive was also seen on one of the trees, and Alt praised the white wolf for the excellent result. After that, the goddess of fertility decided to get down to business and headed in the direction of the beehive. Even in spite of the warnings of danger, the girl said that she would be fine, because the bees are actually the descendants of the fertility goddess, and so she could safely get to the honey. But the goblins distrusted Rudia's words and reminded her that they were actually going to tame a honey bear. But the goddess of fertility showed her self-confidence and came as close as possible to the beehive, and then turned to the bees and asked them to give her some honey. But as it turned out, the bees did not recognize the young girl as a kindred creature and instantly attacked the fertility goddess. Rudia felt the sting of the bee in her nose and immediately decided to run away. The young lord watched in amazement as the all-powerful goddess ran away from the attacking bees and then asked the white wolf to help the girl. Snowy was quickly able to carry Rudia on his back and save her from another attack by the ruthless bees. After that, Alt suggested to make a detour and follow the bees, and maybe then they could find out more information about the honey bear. The fertility goddess was not satisfied with the result of the meeting with the bees and complained about her swollen nose. Alt calmly reminded the girl that they had not originally intended to collect honey and only wanted to find the honey bear. Therefore, it was much more advantageous and peaceful to utilize the honey bear's abilities than to try to steal the honey on their own. Alt tried to calm the upset girl and promised to prepare the best sweets for her. Meanwhile, the white wolf reported something interesting in the flower garden and offered to see for himself. And indeed, near the huge beehive appeared the very honey bear, who came to harvest fresh and fragrant honey without any fear of bees. The honey bear appeared more like a raccoon and different from how the goblins had imagined it. But Alt explained that it was actually a bear, and that was how the animal was known. The bear was not empty-handed, but brought with him a huge vat in which he collected the honey he extracted. The young lord explained that this creature always collects some honey in this vat and takes it to his home. Indeed, a few minutes after its appearance, the honey bear stuck its paw right into the hive without fear of attack. Alt and his companions realized that thanks to its thick fur, this animal was not afraid of being stung and therefore felt confident. Alt decided to tame this monster as soon as possible and explained to the goblins that it was very dangerous to get close to it. The young lord cautiously approached the monster and explained that he was the tamer and wanted to talk. The bear reacted negatively to the intruder and growled threateningly. Alt showed a huge jar and explained that it was much stronger than a clay vat, so he was ready to give the jar to the bear if the bear agreed to be his familiar. The new large jar interested the honey bear and he asked if it was really strong. Alt promised that the jar wouldn't break even if the bear dropped it and hit it a few times to make it clear. This jar was specially purchased from the traders of the Uru tribe, because the plan to tame the honey bear had been in the young lord's mind for a long time. Magic had been used to create this jar, so it was incredibly strong against physical attacks. Honey Bear was convinced of the quality of the jar and said that he was very eager to get his hands on it, for he had been very sad and hurt the last time he had broken his earthen vats. The fertility goddess and the goblins watched with interest and decided that Alt got along well with the bear, especially since he could talk to it normally because his level as a monster tamer had increased. Alt explained to the bear that a pot of honey was nothing to him, and so they could start a mutually beneficial partnership. The young lord also promised the bear a safe place to sleep and 3 meals of the highest quality every day. Honey Bear agreed that this was a very good offer, and with a new strong pot it would be easier for him to harvest honey. Rudia noticed that the bear was smiling, which meant that the negotiations should end well. In the end, the honey bear agreed to cooperate with the young lord and shook hands with Alta as a sign of his agreement. The lad gestured to his companion that the negotiations had been successful, and this made the fertility goddess and the goblins, who were already waiting for a chance to taste the honey, really excited. Alt explained to the honey bear that he was glad of their friendship and he would like to extract some honey for his settlement, if possible of course. The bear agreed and promised to extract a lot of honey. But suddenly a strange man appeared and tried to attack the honey bear with his sword, and this caused surprise and fear in everyone present. The most awkward at this moment was the goblin, who was able to repel the stranger's attack and protect the honey bear. The enraged fellow shouted that anyone who interfered with his hunt would suffer terrible punishment, and tried to attack again. But the goblins were experienced warriors and immediately stood to defend the honey bear from its master, making it clear to the stranger that they would not surrender without a fight. Alt explained to the aggressive fellow that he had just tamed the honey bear, and this monster belonged to him by right. Therefore, the stranger, whoever he was, should immediately stop attacking. The enraged hunter laughed evilly and said why would he even listen to a tamer boy who hides in the shadows and steals other people's profits. The angry stranger shouted that he hated people like Alt and was willing to accomplish his goal at any cost. The goblins were outraged by the aggressive hunter's behavior and demanded to choose their words when speaking to Mr. Alt. But the stranger called the goblins pathetic brats and tried to attack them. The hunter was able to break the resistance of the goblins and recognized that this guy is really a great tamer, since even 2 independent goblins are willing to fight for him. The guy promised to later find out where the treasure was and return to the tamer for his loot. Goddess Rudia was excited and inquired if everything was alright. Rudia was outraged at the appearance of the angry stranger, and the impudent hunter asked that if it was the girl attached to the treasure, he wouldn't mind getting her as a reward at all. After all, it was quite wrong for such a worthless tamer to have such a gorgeous woman. Judging by the stranger's demeanor, Alt decided that this was not a man who could be solved by talking. The young lord told the stranger that if he wanted to harm his friends and Rudia, he should realize the consequences and that no one would be sorry for him. But the lad was confident in his abilities and declared that he was a master swordsman and an experienced adventurer Gain, and so he was not going to back down to some foolish boy. Gain shouted that Alt wouldn't have the strength and courage to stand up to a skilled adventurer like him and immediately rushed to attack. Alt was able to hold back his opponent's blow, but he felt how strong it was. Gain felt his superiority and continued to swing his blade furiously. At the same time, the vicious adventurer shouted that he was fighting at only half his strength, and would be happy to play the victim. Gain promised to embarrass Alta in front of his beautiful girlfriend and strip him of his clothes to humiliate him as much as possible. Snowball couldn't stand such a thing and rushed to his master's aid, but Alt ordered the White Wolf to stay away, for it was too dangerous to attack such an opponent. Alt realized that he couldn't defeat Gain in a sword fight and activated his Divine Flame ability, which was able to melt the evil adventurer's blade in a few seconds. Gain realized at this moment that there was more than just a monster tamer fighting against him and angrily growled out who Alt was. But the young lord was not going to talk to his opponent and hurriedly summoned the divine dragon Bahamut. The appearance of the huge monster shocked the self-confident adventurer Jane. Bahamut immediately asked who exactly dared to disturb the master's tranquility, and this person should immediately disappear in the dragon flames. Alt did not want to kill the brazen adventurer and asked Bahamut to burn his armor and leave him unprotected. The divine flames instantly engulfed Jane, but despite his consternation he only marginally felt the immense temperature. A few seconds later, the cocky adventurer was left in just his underwear, which made everyone watching the fight laugh. Alt declared to his opponent that he had lost his weapons and armor and therefore he had no chance of winning, so he should surrender. Gain was an arrogant and self-confident, but not a stupid man, and so after assessing his chances he bowed his head and admitted his defeat. After a successful journey into the forest, the young lord returned to his village and took his new acquaintance Gain with him. The locals were happy to see Alt return and immediately welcomed him back. The villagers immediately offered Alt an opportunity to assess the crop of tomatoes that had managed to grow in just one day, and then asked if the young lord had managed to tame the honey bear. Alt explained that the honey bear had promised to supply their settlement with honey and had found a cozy place in a huge hollow tree at the edge of the settlement. The bear appreciated the cozy and quiet place and said that this was where he was going to store his honey. Alt thanked the bear for his helpfulness, because now, thanks to his honey, he would be able to work on the village dishes and greatly improve the mood of the locals. Honey Bear was also happy about the changes in his life and admitted that now he doesn't feel lonely around Snowball and the rest of his friends and will be happy to live together with everyone. Meanwhile, rumors of Alt being a monster tamer from the royal palace reached the outlying areas and it surprised many people. The young lord thanked all the villagers for their help, and Gain admitted that he was very surprised by Alt's ability to communicate with monsters. The locals were distrustful of the strange adventurer, who in their opinion looked like a real pervert. But Gain asked them not to think ill of him and explained that he was now Mr. Alt's new vassal, and ready to serve him. Alt eventually explained that Gain was an experienced adventurer, and he had attacked him in the forest, and after his defeat he had decided to join the settlement. Rudier recognized that Gain was indeed a very strong swordsman, and they were only able to fend off his attack because of Alt's skills. Gain explained that he was actually unaware that Alt was from a nobleman's family, and so he apologized and was willing to dedicate his life to service. Alt of course forgave the adventurer and promised to think about his proposal, because in any case he needed to expand his settlement and new people would come in handy. At the moment, Alt's village had only about 150 inhabitants, including the recently arrived goblins, and so there was an acute shortage of labor. Apparently there were other powerful monsters in the nearby forest, such as the Dark Elves, and all these creatures could become useful resources that would help in the development of the settlement. Alt was full of hopes to develop new ties with other representatives of the local inhabitants, because if even the goblins agreed to cooperate with him, the others could also become good allies. Gain was a very strange man. Although he promised to serve the young lord faithfully and wished Alt to succeed, as a vassal it would be much more pleasant for him to be under the leadership of a successful leader. The goddess Rudia was still distrustful of Gain and asked if he was really an adventurer, as he looked more like a common bandit. Jane replied that he was a decent man, but at that moment one of the locals recognized him. The local guy said that this voice he would not confuse with anyone else, and once Gain did not pay for his hotel stay and for the alcohol he drank, but just ran away like a real scumbag. Gain was also accused of showing interest in the innkeeper's daughter and ended up promising never to come to this village. Gain was shocked by the exposure and could not justify himself in any way at this point. Eventually, the agitated adventurer admitted his guilt and apologized to the local innkeeper for all his actions. Gain apologized and promised to pay for everything he owed at double the rate. Rudia was glad to have exposed the cunning fellow and was once again convinced that her premonition had never failed her. The fertility goddess asked why Gain had lied from the beginning and why he was such a miserable adventurer that he couldn't even pay the old man for staying at the inn and drinking cheap alcohol. Gain was frightened by the goddess and the girl demanded to pay the fine of 1 million gold coins immediately. The adventurer tried to protest and said that however his deeds and this huge price were completely disproportionate. But Rudia explained that it would be far worse if the real culprit became Mr. Alta's vassal before this without receiving the punishment he deserved. Gain disagreed that he was a criminal and explained that he merely did not like to pay his bills. But the goddess of fertility threatened to call the goblins and the honey bear to convince him. The goddess Rudia informed everyone that the sneaky Jane had tried to kill the honey bear, drove away the goblins, and pointed his blade at Mr. Alta. Truth had spent money on lodging and attacked her in that inappropriate attire. Rudia again demanded that the adventurer pay for his crimes immediately, and threatened that otherwise she would have him imprisoned. Alt, watching this, decided that the girl had gone too far, but the goddess of fertility explained that she needed money to realize Alt's dream. Gain realized that he would not be able to get away with it and promised to pay the necessary amount. Gain said that since he had to become a scapegoat for his deed, he would have to pay for it by bloodletting and gave all his money. The fertility goddess was happy, because now they could get back the money they had paid to the merchants and they could use the ability of the god Gacha again. The girl also asked if the stolen money could be returned after Gacha was over. Gain was shocked by Rudia's perfidy and asked if she represented the demon lord's interests. The alt promised the upset adventurer an increase in his salary if the settlement progressed. In the end, the young lord decided to fulfill Rudia's wish and pay for the opportunity to use the god Gacha's ability. The old innkeeper forgave Jane and advised him to calm down and look forward to the future with hope. Meanwhile, everyone was very curious about who Alt would summon this time. The required amount of gold coins was ready and all that was left was to activate Alt's unique ability. The young monster tamer realized that he would have to spend almost all of his savings and needed to be brave to take this responsible step. But if a creature like Rudia or Bahamut's dragon were to be successful, then all this money would pay off. And it remains to be seen whether a bet of 1 million gold coins can pull off the so-called jackpot. A few seconds after activating the skill of the god Gacha, a bright pillar of magical light reappeared and it caused the locals and the adventurer Gain to be truly delighted. Everyone waited hopefully for the summoning to be completed and looked at the disc where the creature they had spent so much money on would appear. This time, Alt was able to summon a SR-ranked hot spring goddess named Kuzua, who looked like a very cheerful girl. Goddess Rudia was the most excited about this event, and exclaimed that they hadn't seen Kuzua for 2,000 years. The fact that the two girls were friends was a real revelation to the locals and they watched their conversation with interest. Rudia explained that Kuzua is her vassal goddess and she considers her her little sister. And since Kuzua is the goddess of hot springs, they can now manifest the wonders of hot springs not only in this village but all over the world. Kuzua was happy to be among friends and promised to make everyone happy with hot springs that would give true pleasure to everyone in the village. Alt was incredibly surprised by the appearance of yet another noisy goddess and hoped that it wouldn't turn out to be a mistake. Kuzua immediately after her appearance promised to show everyone her power and reward the locals with hot springs. After these words, a real earthquake started, which scared many people. A few minutes after the strong shaking started, strong fountains of hot water burst out of the ground and it surprised everyone. The water turned out to be really hot and Alt rejoiced at such an incredible phenomenon. Kuzua explained that under the influence of hot springs magical energy and health will be restored very quickly, and also all the characteristics will be doubled for a period of 24 hours. Gain was happy about the opportunity to increase his combat stats and said that it was a tremendous effect. Alt was also happy about this opportunity and immediately decided to check his status. It was just as the goddess of hot springs had said. Absolutely all of the young lord's parameters had doubled and it was incredible. All the people who fell under the influence of the hot spring felt an incredible surge of strength and energy, and the most elderly residents of the settlement felt like young people again and rejoiced at the opportunity. Jane confessed that he had been foolish to spend so much time and energy raising his level during battles, as it would have been much easier to succeed. But Kuzua exclaimed that there was more to it than that and explained that the hot springs could cure any illness or injury, except for unrequited love. This was a real gift to the villagers, for they had been suffering from a lack of medicine for many years. Kuzua was happy to feel the attention of everyone and enjoyed the gratitude of the people. The goddess advised everyone to heal their wounds and raise their levels. The goblins, feeling a surge of energy, immediately decided to create an impregnable fortress that would provide defense against any threats. Gain said that he felt so strong that he could even resist a dragon. Meanwhile, Alt asked if the hot springs could heal the monster's wounds and received a positive answer from Kuzua. Goddess Rudia explained that these magic springs were known and favored by the gods, so ordinary humans and monsters could of course also benefit greatly from their effects. That being said, Rudia was very happy to be by her little sister's side again and promised to show people the power of the gacha goddesses. Alt thanked Rudia and confessed that he now truly understood the dignity of paying to use the gacha god's ability, and had absolutely no regrets about spending the gold coins. The fertility goddess quickly created a mixed outdoor bathing area thanks to her abilities, which pleased all the residents. Alt immediately suggested that Snowball also take the opportunity to relax in the hot water, and the White Wolf gladly agreed. Kyuzuha suggested to immediately build a great hotel with hot springs and advised Alt to attract as many customers as possible to make the place famous. In the end, it was decided to divide the duties and follow Kyuzuha's instructions to succeed as quickly as possible and make the hot springs the dignity of this village. Alt decided to ask the Honey Bear to help as well, and then he was surprised by the new kind of monster. Honey Bear, under the influence of the hot magic water, turned from an ordinary fat man into a real athlete and promised to provide any help needed. As a result, after universal agreement, the grandiose construction of the inn and improvements for vacation at the hot springs began. Meanwhile, in the Adventurers Guild in the royal capital, indignant cries and arguments were heard. Namical was making complaints about the services rendered by the adventurers, but the stern administrator replied that Namical Austin had committed a serious breach of the terms of cooperation during the quest, and so he would now be unable to use the guild's services. The administrator explained that she was aware that Namical had allowed the abuse of the S-ranked adventurer who was escorting him. Namical continued to be outraged and accused the adventurers of being unprofessional during the task of escorting him. But the administrator explained that such behavior in a dangerous dungeon was outrageous, and now the leadership of the Adventurers Guild had decided to refuse Mr. Namical their services. But the Count's narcissistic son reminded them that he was the royal monster tamer, and no one could refuse him. Namical called the guild administrator a foolish woman and shouted that if she went against him, it would mean she had gone against the kingdom. The girl kept her icy calm and reminded the vile fellow in a stern voice that the Adventurers Guild was a supranational organization, and they were completely independent of the kingdom and therefore had absolutely no obligation to obey the orders of the nobles. This enraged Namical, and he shouted that if this continued, the monsters kept in the royal palace would get out of control and cause a lot of trouble. The receptionist, without changing her facial expression, asked if she understood correctly that Mr. Namical was the heir to the prestigious monster tamer family of Earl Austin, and did they not tame monsters for the purpose of consuming them for food? Namical hissed back that that was exactly the case. At that, Namical remembered how he had always left his brother Alta to take care of the monsters, and as a result, his own tamer level had only remained first. And now that the keeper had been attacked by monsters that had gotten angry in the royal palace, things were out of control. Namical realized that his own abilities were not enough to control the embittered monsters, and his brother had been banished to distant lands. That's why Namical wanted to tame the dragon as quickly as possible with the help of the adventurers and quell the rebellious palace monsters. And if this could not be done, then His Majesty the King would be furious and would definitely deprive the Austin family of all titles and lands. All of this would lead to the complete destruction of the Austin family, and Namical knew that much of this was his fault. Namical tried to explain to the administrator that he was in a great hurry and needed help to tame the dragon as soon as possible. But the unwavering girl reiterated that Mr. Namical was forbidden service in the Adventurers Guild, and therefore he had better leave this establishment as soon as possible. Namical decided not to give up and began to offer any amount of money, because there must be adventurers who do the dirty work for the appropriate reward, and as far as he knows, such a guy is an adventurer of a rank gain. The administrator girl's patience reached its maximum, and she shouted that the Adventurers Guild doesn't take on such cases, and that Gain had already left for Silesia a long time ago. Namical said that everything in this world is decided by money and power anyway, and so he must achieve his goal no matter what. The Count's angry son threw gold coins at the administrator's girlfriend and shouted that any woman would be happy to be the partner of a rich and powerful man. Namical continued throwing coins and demanded from the girl to immediately call him Adventurer Jane and stop being a stupid fool who pretends that she is not interested in money. The stern administrator's patience really ran out at this point, and she summoned 2 huge guards, who she immediately ordered to immediately kick this vile man out and never let him into the guild again. The tough guys easily carried Namical out of the guild and then happily threw him to the ground. Namical continued to resent and insult the guild workers, but that didn't help him in any way in this situation. The huge guards explained to the guy that this establishment was not some filthy brothel for brazen aristocrats, and advised him to never come here again. Namakel, of course, could not resist the two sturdy guys and was satisfied only with threats to burn down the guild with the help of a dragon. But that was not the end of the trouble for the Count's son, and a few seconds later Namakel received a heavy blow to the jaw. A group of local adventurers had heard about Namakel's sneaky behavior with their colleagues during the mission. After that, the Count's son felt a great deal of blows and realized what the wrath of adventurers was. Meanwhile, the palace was in chaos and the monsters were completely out of control, and even attacked the princess. Immediately there was a question who should be responsible for all this chaos. The culprit was quickly found, and of course it was Namakel Austin, who was listed as the palace tamer of monsters, and he was called for a serious conversation. After 3 days of grueling work, Alt's settlement could boast an excellent inn and very comfortable hot springs where everyone could relax. Alt was very happy with the result of the work, because they had managed to build an excellent hotel very quickly. The guy dreamily looked at the starry sky and enjoyed the warm water. But suddenly the silence was broken by the noisy Kuzua. The goddess of hot springs said that mixed bathing was a common phenomenon in the ancient world, and such places were a great place for men and women to socialize. But now unfortunately the traditions have changed a bit, and you have to wear a swimsuit. Kuzua asked why Alta's face became so red, but the guy explained his embarrassment by trivial dizziness. The girl took the guy's condition very seriously and hurriedly took him out of the hot water to rest and recover. But just at that moment Rudia appeared and was shocked to see Alta in Kuzua's company. The girl instantly felt a surge of jealousy and demanded an explanation. Kuzua confessed that she was delighted with Mr. Alta's passionate approach, and this caused a just indignation in the guy, because he really didn't think of anything like that. But the degree of Rudia's patience rose considerably and she gradually became furious. In the end, the goddess of fertility could not contain her emotions and attacked Alta, accusing him of treason. The young lord received a crushing blow to the solar plexus and in a few seconds found himself in the warm embrace of a hot spring. The girls quickly kept him company and it all looked very ridiculous. Kuzua had warned about her friends that the floor here was too slippery and they needed to be careful. Rudia had already calmed down and was feeling awkward after stupidly crashing into Alt. Alt then explained that it was all a trivial misunderstanding, and Rudia replied that if there was no cheating, she certainly wouldn't be angry. Alt rejoiced at this and remembered that he never realized exactly what his relationship with the fertility goddess was. Then Alt told him that they had managed to build different baths for women, men and guests so that everyone felt comfortable and didn't disturb each other. And this was Mr. Alt's personal open-air bath, and it was different from the others with more comfortable service and better location. But all the people who had visited the hot springs agreed in their opinion that these magnificent places brought people closer together, and so they could expect the population of the village to rise sharply. Kuzua also suggested that the number of customers would increase significantly in the near future, and asked the young lord to tame a good buffalo next time. The goddess of hot springs explained that drinking fresh milk after bathing is a proven way to enjoy the springs. Therefore, it would be a good idea to provide the settlement with fresh milk. Alt promised to fulfill this request and remembered that the buffalo was a cow-type monster capable of producing milk of the highest quality. Alt also suggested that good milk could be used to make sweets and that it was a good idea to get a buffalo. If such an animal could be tamed, the village would be much richer and more attractive to visitors. The goddess Rudia supported the idea, but was still upset that Alt was paying too much attention to her younger sister. The only ones behaving calmly were Snowball and Honey Bear, as they were just enjoying the warm water and thinking about the progress of the village, which was growing every day. The next day, the young lord of the village visited the local tailor, a role assumed by the goblin. The tailor explained that he emphasized ease of movement in his clothes and offered Alt to evaluate his suit. Alt stated that the suit did indeed fit him perfectly and he could go to the field and even for a walk in the forest in these clothes. Gain apologized for making the clothes look so unremarkable, but he asked Alt not to worry about it and explained that it was okay. Alt then stated that he was looking forward to the adventurer showing him the habitat of the buffalo he needed, and Gain promised to take him to the right place. At this point, Alt and his friends had successfully built an inn with hot springs, and at the request of the goddess Kazuhui, who was very eager for fresh milk, decided to set out on a journey. For this purpose they had to go in search of a buffalo in the forest. The walk seemed easy and the friends had fun discussing how they would enjoy the fresh milk. After a while, strange creatures appeared on the traveler's path and tried to attack, but Gain showed his skills as a great swordsman and fended off all attacks, and then explained that they were just simple monsters and needed to move on. Rudia recognized that they could trust the adventurer now because he knew the right path and was able to protect them from attacks. Although at the beginning of their acquaintance this guy was very bad. Gain felt an incredible surge of strength and explained that thanks to the hot springs he was able to increase his abilities and could now defeat any monster. The adventurer confessed that he liked the territory of Silesia very much because it reminded him of a wonderful garden where he could stroll carefree. The friends agreed with Jane and enjoyed the walk. Rudia praised Jane for his knowledge of the forest, but the adventurer explained that he hadn't really fully explored the forest and only knew some areas. After a while, the goddess of fertility decided to treat her beloved Alta with a wonderful cookie made of honey, which the bear had diligently collected. And this treat was indeed very tasty and pleased the young lord. Rudia reminded him that she had baked the cookies herself and offered to drink the honey juice, which was incredibly sweet. The friends rejoiced and cheered without expecting anything bad to happen. Gain, watching his friends, admitted that he was jealous of how Mr. Rudia and Alt were so close. But Snowball was at this moment only engrossed in a honey cookie, which he wouldn't give up either. Alt said that this walk was more like a picnic and suggested that we take a short break in nature and look for a suitable place. Gain looked around and said that they had reached the buffalo habitat and that the animal might be nearby. But suddenly there was a scream from the girl and Alt quickly jumped on the white wolf and rushed to the noise. A few minutes later he saw a strange rider on a buffalo with a spear in his hands and a girl crying for help. Alt didn't understand at all what was going on but clearly saw that you have an armed guy trying to attack a harmless girl, and it seemed like something bad. The young lord instantly decided to intervene and attack the stranger with a spear using divine flame, and the dangerous weapon turned to dust in a split second. Alt then shouted that he was the master of these territories and would not allow any disorderly behavior here. But the aggressive stranger didn't listen to the guy's words and promised to destroy Alt. The young lord was shocked by the speed at which the huge buffalo was approaching him and felt fear begin to overpower his consciousness. But at that moment Snowball ordered his master to hold on as tightly as possible, and in the next second he collided with the buffalo. The white wolf showed incredible strength and was able to push the huge buffalo away. It was really impressive, and the buffalo master couldn't believe what had happened. The buffalo rider, trying to get out from under his pet, was indignant and cursed the people who prevented him. Anger mixed with despair, for this guy had not expected to meet such strong opponents. The goddess Rudia exclaimed that a man who tried to kill an unarmed girl could not be forgiven. Alt decided to seize the moment and ordered the buffalo to follow him. The animal reacted to the monster tamer and made a move towards him. The former owner started to resent and tried to get his pet back, but the huge buffalo was already under Alt's control and did not listen to anything but the words of the new owner. Alt explained to the animal that his former master had not always treated him with love and it was wrong. But the dark elf started to become indignant and stated that his race were natural-born monster tamers, and then snapped into insults and threats. At this, the dark elf looked at his opponent and noticed that Alt actually looked like a level 9 human tamer. The dark elf gradually began to guess that most likely this young monster tamer belonged to the Austin aristocrat family that he had heard about many times. The dark elf didn't understand why the kingdom tamer was in such a remote place and prevented him from defeating the princess. Alt was surprised that he had managed to save the elf princess by pure chance, something he had not expected at all at the beginning of his journey. The enraged dark elf said that the conflict between the elves had been going on for more than 2,000 years and no one should interfere in these matters, especially not humans. Just at that moment a squad of elves appeared and everyone began to greet the buffalo rider and congratulate him on his victory over the princess. But the dark elf explained that there was actually a trouble and he would now destroy those people who prevented him from doing away with the princess. Alt asked Rudia to take care of the elf princess and the white wolf to protect the girls. The guy then stated to the elves that he was the lord of Silesia and would not allow there to be conflict in this forest. Alt demanded to calm down and asked the dark elves to talk to him. But the leader of the dark elf squad stated that no one was going to talk to a foolish man and ordered his subordinates to destroy the idiot. But Alt was ready for such a development and exclaimed that he was not alone here. In the next second, the elves were attacked by the adventurer Gain. The adventurer was glad to be in battle again and shouted that he was a swordsman in the service of Mr. Alt, and promised that the dark elves would very soon regret refusing to talk. At the same time, Alt applied Kuzuha's inherited skill and doubled the characteristics of his friends. The Dark Elves were frightened, but the ringleader ordered them not to retreat. Then, one Dark Elf tried to attack Alta and displayed the incredible speed that was characteristic of the race. But the young Lord of Silesia, thanks to his doubled strength, was able to hit the opponent so hard that the Dark Elf flew above the trees. This surprised not only the representatives of the Elven race, but also Alta himself, who only wanted to stop his opponent. Snowball didn't stay aside either and had already managed to neutralize several Dark Elves who were stupid enough to try to attack the White Wolf. After a few minutes, the Dark Elves realized that they were completely powerless in this battle and began to lower their weapons. The snowball had a strong effect on the opponents, terrified the Dark Elves, but the Dark Elf mage at that moment tried to attack with a magic arrow spell. Alt had time to react to the danger and repelled this attack with Divine Flame. The Dark Elf regretted not being able to destroy the princess and get her blood. Eventually, Alt grew tired of this battle and decided to enlist the help of the divine dragon Bahamut. The huge creature stunned the Dark Elves, who continued to resist. Bahamut declared that it was very foolish of them to disobey Mr. Alta's demands, and now they could be destroyed at any second by his terrible flames. The elven princess saw a real dragon for the first time in her life and gazed admiringly at the monster, feeling its strength and power. The Dark Elves met with horror and rushed to flee, hoping to save their lives. The flight was swift and the Dark Elves once again showed their incredible speed. Alt dared to give the order to the dragon to burn the opponents and silently watched the retreat of the enemies. Meanwhile, Bahamut spotted Gain and asked whose side he was on. The frightened adventurer stammered and explained that he was protecting Lord Alt and was his loyal vassal. All of this amused the goddess Rudia, and Alt was chatting with the buffalo at the moment. The elven princess thanked the goddess for her rescue and introduced herself as Tio, admitting that she didn't expect to survive today. Alt introduced himself as the lord of the province of Silesia, and then introduced the elven princess to his friends. Alt, realizing that he had royalty in front of him, knelt down and stated that he was happy to help the princess and was ready to ensure her safety. Elven Princess Tio was delighted by such excellent manners of the young lad and even blushed with embarrassment. These emotions were of course noticed by the goddess of fertility and once again felt an attack of jealousy. Rudia immediately turned into an aggressive woman and said that Alt was her husband and therefore there was no need to flirt with him. The young lord was already tired of such situations and asked Rudia to calm down immediately, because they weren't actually married. After the fertility goddess calmed down, Alt invited the elven princess Tio to visit his village and socialize in a quiet environment. After all, he has good food and excellent hot springs. Also, Alt didn't forget about the buffalo, which he definitely decided to take with him. The huge buffalo thanked for his kindness, and the elven princess gladly accepted the young lord's invitation. Meanwhile, peace and quiet reigned in the Austen family mansion. Namakel was resting in his room after his failures and trying to forget about the meeting with the adventurers. But there was a sudden knock at the door and the lad irritably invited entry. It was a young maid who brought sweets for the young master, but the girl was not at all expecting to be whipped and fell to the floor. Enraged, Namakel began to insult the maid and resented that she had spent too long preparing one strawberry cake and now she should be punished. The girl was shocked by this reaction of Namakel and started trembling with fear. Earl Austen's maid, a girl named Lilina, was born into a poor noble family of lower class, and now Lilina very often remembered those happy days when she had to take care of Mr. Alta. She truly believed that this young and well-mannered man would be the next head of the Austen family. Lilina relished every opportunity to be around this kind and sweet man and thought she had the nicest place to work. The young and naive maid felt truly happy and happily fulfilled all requests and tasks from Mr. Alta. But now everything changed and the kind son was forced to leave his ancestral home and eventually another son of the Count. Namakel was chosen as the heir to the family after acquiring the skill of Dragon Tamer. Lilin was very much affected by Mr. Alt's banishment, for it greatly affected her mood and her work in general. And ever since Mr. Alt left his father's house, his twin brother Namakel turned into a real tyrant. The girl was constantly feeling nostalgic for the days when Mr. Alt was around and always joking around. And now she had to watch the evil son of the Count, who after he was beaten adventurer completely became unbearable. Of course, all the adventurers were charged with insulting His Majesty and attacking the Count's son, for the adventurers had indeed been deservedly cruel to Namakel. Now the Count's angry son asked the maid every time whether the perpetrators of the crime had been caught. But Lilina always answered in the same way, that no one had been found yet, unfortunately. She knew that it was unlikely that they would be, for the adventurers would not give each other away. The maid tried to explain that the adventurers who had disrespected Mr. Namakel had probably left the capital for fear of retribution. But Namakel did not calm down and constantly recalled that shameful day in his life. The maid then reported that His Excellency the head said that he did not intend to cause any further trouble, and just wanted to forget the incident. Namakel was furious at what he heard and shouted that did all the commoners dare to laugh at him, and how could he now retreat after such a thing? Then Namakel asked if he could find any other dungeons in the country where dragons dwell. After all, if he didn't manage to tame a dragon soon, he would be accused of incompetence. Lilina reminded him that there is a dragon mountain not far from the eastern border. From ancient times, this mountain was known as the home of the dragon. Namakel shouted with joy and thought that now he could solve all his problems. But as it turned out, this mountain was more than 9,000 meters high, and Namakel had no idea how to get to the dragon's nest. Lilina suggested that the young lord try to tame the dragon lizard. This creature was the weakest monster of the dragon type and was often found throughout the forests of the land. But Namakel bellowed back that there was no point in taming from this weak monster, for it would only make him look ridiculous. The enraged Namakel then ordered the maid to immediately feed him a strawberry stomp. Besides being cruel, Namakel was also a very capricious person and constantly demanded to be looked after like a little child, and this disliked Lilin very much. The maid constantly thought that if she had known in advance how things would turn out, she would have been happy to leave the house with Mr. Alt and move to the countryside. Lilina had often heard that the remote province is a creepy place, where there are a lot of different monsters and demons, and therefore it was a mistake not to go with Mr. Alt. After all, now you have to serve the evil and vile Mr. Namakel, and all this does not bring any pleasure at all. Lilina sincerely wished to change her situation and constantly thought how to do it. Only now the young maid began to realize that her former life with Mr. Alt was truly paradisiacal, and it would be wonderful to return to those times. Looking at the disgusting Mr. Namakel, the maid wanted to go in search of Mr. Alt at any second and not even pack her things. Suddenly a servant entered the room and informed her that unfortunately unpleasant events had occurred and a messenger from the royal palace had arrived. And apparently there was an emergency incident in the royal palace with a monster that somehow bit the hand of Her Royal Highness Princess Anna. Namakel was shocked by this news, but the nougat explained that Princess Anna was very angry because her wound was very deep. And now Lord Namakel has been ordered to come to the royal palace immediately and explain what is happening. Her Royal Highness Princess Anna had become famous as a ruthless woman and was nicknamed the Ice Princess. And now Namakel felt like a doomed man, for the worst thing that could ever happen to him had happened. Namakel could not believe what had happened. He had imagined his fate differently. He wanted to tame the strongest divine dragon, Bahamut, and receive praise from Princess Anna herself. But things are different now. Namakel had long dreamed of surprising Princess Anna, of marrying her, and becoming a count. He could rule over a large part of the state. But now all these dreams were threatened. Eventually, Namakel, with heavy thoughts in his head, finally reached the royal palace and found Princess Anna in her room in a foul mood. Her Majesty immediately showed him the hand that had been bitten by the unicorn. Anna reminded her that this had never happened in the days when Alt was the chief tamer, which meant that Namakel was not following the instructions for caring for monsters and was negligent in his work. Princess Anne then stated that all of this could be taken to mean that the Earl of Austin's family intends to rebel against the royal family. Namakel began to justify himself and explained that he had been working hard for the past few days to tame the best dragon possible, and as a result had to be a bit neglectful and unfortunately slackened his attention behind the monsters. The princess, she listened calmly to the excuse and then inquired as to where this important dragon was now, and she wouldn't mind seeing it. Namakel remained silent, and Princess Anna stated that as far as she understood, the main tamer of the royal palace at the special had refused to do his job and as a result had gotten no results. And also, as far as she knew, Namakel had caused trouble for himself with the Adventurers Guild, which was generally unacceptable for an aristocrat. Namakel felt his head spinning and began to promise that he would definitely show results soon. Princess Anna advised him to achieve at least something, because otherwise Namakel would learn firsthand how cruel she could be to unwanted people. Princess Anna then confessed that after today's encounter, she was beginning to think about stripping Namakel of his position as royal monster tamer. Namakel began to beg her not to do that and promised to rehabilitate herself in the eyes of her substance very soon, and then mentioned the ceremony. But Princess Anne replied that at the moment she was very disappointed, because she had previously had high hopes for Namakel, and now she did not understand why the Austin family had exiled Alta to a remote province, because he was doing a great job. And now there were voices from everywhere saying that the Austin family lacked power and ability, and it was true. Namakel couldn't dispute the princess's words and quietly said that he was sorry. Princess Anna explained that if the Austen family is further disgraced, in that case, she will use her power to return Alta to the position of royal monster tamer, and after that, she would not deny herself the pleasure of deporting Namakel and his father to some other country. Namakel could barely contain his emotions as he listened to the princess threats and mentally cursed his brother, because now he was in a terrible situation because of him. After the meeting with Namakel, Princess Anna learned that there were interesting messages from the settlers in the province of Silesia. According to the reports, the young Lord Alt Austen is using the divine dragon Bahamut as a summoned beast. It is also said that even the evil goblins are under the control of his power. Namakel was horrified at such news, for even his supreme dragon tamer skill could not subdue the summoned Bahamut. Namakel could not believe what he had heard, for his brother was a tamer, not a monster summoner, and how in that case he was able to achieve such results. But then Namakel remembered the moment when he had met Bahamut, and the divine dragon had told him that he had been summoned by his true master. Princess Anna was very surprised by this news and wanted to know the details. After all, if it really turns out to be true, then her father the king will definitely choose Alta as a groom for her. After all, the royal family needs strong heroes to fight against other countries. Namakel was humiliated and depressed at the news that Alt might be the groom for Princess Anna, for he had dreamed of taking on this role with his skill as a dragon tamer. Namakel smugly thought he was a true hero and the only thing he had to do was control the monsters in the royal palace. But now he finds himself an incompetent vassal to the princess and can't even manage that task. Namakel realized that the only chance to remedy his situation was to tame the dragon. But the princess was greatly distressed by Namakel's incompetence and no longer wanted him around, at least until he rehabilitated himself. Namakel understood his desperate situation and regretted that it had happened at all. Meanwhile, Count Austen listened to the servant's report and realized that Princess Anna liked his son Alt much more than she herself had expected. It was also hard for the Count to believe that his exiled son was able to tame the divine dragon Bahamut. The Count realized that his family was at stake at the moment, and if Alt returned back to the capital, he and Namakel would be sent to a distant exile. The Count slapped the table in anger and said that in that case it would be the end for him and he would lose everything he had worked for all his life. The Count reflected on the fact that he had managed to achieve a lot in retirement, and now he lived quietly surrounded by beautiful maids and wanted to live peacefully in his estate. But now it was all threatened. The Count admitted to himself that he really thought that Namakel's dragon tamer ability would allow him to unconditionally subdue the most powerful creature. But Namakel had failed to deliver and had not subdued the divine dragon Bahamut. And how could this even happen, since the dragon tamer skill is considered the most prestigious skill? But then the Count began to realize that the quality of this skill was influenced by the basic monster tamer skill, and perhaps that was the secret behind Namakel's failures. The Count continued to empty bottles of tart wine and tried to understand how in general Alt achieved such a result and was able to subdue the strongest dragon, and Namakel turned out to be a pathetic disappointment. Gradually, the alcohol began to overpower the Count's mind and he felt anger and rage. Also, the Count was annoyed by the fact that Namakel could no longer hire seekers or adventurers and the fool was blocked everywhere. Eventually, the drunken Count began to realize that he had no choice but to go and do something about it. But how to do it was unclear, because he had already stepped away a long time ago and didn't want to deal with other people's problems again. The Count gradually realized that Alt is the only one who understands the nature and personalities of over 1,000 monsters. He also knows the characteristics of all the monsters in the royal palace, which means Alt was best suited to continue the Austen family lineage. The old Earl was desperate and was trying to figure out how to solve all the problems now. 2 days later, an unexpected letter was delivered to Dorian from Alt living on the outskirts of the state. Princess Tio, approaching Alta's settlement, was surprised to see goblins on the walls instead of humans, who turned out to be cheerful and welcomed the returning travelers. Gain explained that the elven princess should not be so surprised, for Mr. Alt is the strongest monster tamer who can take control of any creatures. Goddess Rudia also stated that the only person who can do such a thing is Alt. The young lord was embarrassed by the praise and asked his friends not to overestimate his abilities. Tio really couldn't verify that goblins live together with humans, for according to elven folklore, demonic creatures could only obey the demon lord. Tio cautiously asked who Mr. Alt even was, but the young lord explained that the goblins were very frightened by Bahamut, and after that they decided to join and stop attacking humans. Rudia explained to the elven princess that Bahamut was that huge dragon she could see in the forest. Tio slowly began to realize that the huge dragon was a divine being that was fighting against the Demon King's army, and she could definitely feel the immense power of this being. Soon Kuzua showed up and was happy to see Alta back, and was especially happy when she saw the buffalo that could produce milk. The goddess of the hot springs thanked the boy for being able to tame this useful animal. It was also revealed that thanks to the goblins, the hot springs inn was fully equipped and ready to host any level of guests. Alt thanked Kuzua for her hard work, because no one but her could better equip the hot springs, and now the village gradually turned into an attractive resort. All this really surprised the elven princess. Alt then explained to Tio that Kuzua was responsible for building and managing the hot springs tavern in this village. The goddess Rudia is in charge of agriculture. The adventurer Gain is in charge of defense. The bear are in charge of collecting Cuda, and the white wolf Snowball provides general security. Alt once again thanked the goddess of hot springs for a job well done and stroked her head. Kuzua was pleased with her success and confessed that she liked to be praised. Rudia looked at this and once again felt a tingle in her body and an overwhelming jealousy. Rudia literally lashed out at her younger sister and demanded that she never hit on Alta again. But Kuzua accused the fertility goddess of selfishness and said that she could not be the only one at her master's side. But Rudia disagreed and exclaimed that Alt belonged to her alone. This was not the first time Gain had seen such a scene, and explained to the elven princess that in a few minutes they would all calm down and one could not worry. But Princess Tio still had a hard time believing that in this village, humans were living peacefully together with goblins as well as beastmen, and no one was fighting with anyone. To the elven princess, it all seemed like some utopia built by Lucifer, the demon king, for an unknown purpose. But Alt only grinned in response and explained that his settlement was indeed something like an ancient legend. According to this legend, Lucifer invaded the heavens to control the entire world. There, Lucifer fell in love with the goddess Rudia, and the feeling proved to be mutual. Alt wondered if the goddess Rudia, from this legend, was the goddess he had called to his aid. Gradually, the young lord began to suspect that it was the same goddess. After all, judging from the legend, the beloved goddess Lucifer fell asleep 2,000 years ago. Princess Tio also began to speculate about this similarity, and explained that in ancient times, the goddess Rudia was also in charge of fertility and farming. Alt then explained that Kuzua was not a beastman, but was also the goddess of hot springs. The young lord admitted that he had a unique skill called the God of Gacha and could summon incredible divine beings. And it was through this ability that he was able to summon these two goddesses. But the goddess of fertility for some reason considered herself more important than Kuzua. The elven princess was incredibly surprised and stated that if Rudia was indeed the goddess of fertility, then according to elven beliefs it was the supreme deity that governed nature and was worshipped by all elves. Tio's amazement was increasing by the minute, and she watched with interest. After all the creatures living in the village really looked very happy and welcomed their lord Alta, and it was unnatural for the suspicious princess. The local elder immediately showed the lord a new crop of excellent tomatoes that really looked large and ripe. Alt explained that thanks to the abilities of the goddess Rudia, tomatoes grow very big and sweet, and all she has to do is touch any plant, and it starts to grow better and give a huge harvest. The elven princess looked at the really big tomato with interest and then confessed that its taste is really excellent, and there are no such juicy tomatoes even in the country of elves. Alt boasted that the tomato paste that could be made from these tomatoes would be a great commodity in any market. Gain then demonstrated the medicinal berries, which he had also managed to grow thanks to the abilities of the goddess of fertility. The adventurer said that this settlement had everything they needed, delicious food and hot springs, and if Tio decided to stay here, she would not want to return to the land of the elves either. In the evening, Tio bathed in the hot springs and confessed that she had never experienced such a pleasure, and it could be called a real culture shock. The princess explained that she couldn't believe that taking a bath could be so pleasant, and the cool and fresh milk was also very pleasant to taste and energizing. Alt was pleased that he had managed to please a member of the elven royal family. Tio admitted that she was surprised by everything in this settlement, and she couldn't believe that Mr. Alt was able to welcome a representative of the elven people so warmly. Tio explained that her parents had taught her that all humans were greedy creatures and hated elves, but apparently it was a mistake, and now she regrets that she used to think so much about people. The princess also gave thanks for being saved from death. Alt apologized for his curiosity and asked what really happened in the forest and why such a beautiful elfess was attacked. Before beginning her story, the elven princess again expressed her gratitude to Alt and the goddess Rudia for their help. Just at that moment, the doors of the room suddenly opened and Rudia asked if she had understood correctly that her name was called. But Alt replied that she had not and mentally appreciated the fertility goddess's phenomenal hearing. This made the elf laugh, and the princess asked not to keep formalities or to call her by her first name, because it was much easier to communicate between friends. Then Tio explained that in fact she is a princess of the lost country of elves, and unfortunately not everyone likes it. As it turned out, the Kingdom of Elves, which has a history of more than 2,000 years, was destroyed by a swift attack of dark elves. And about 6 months ago, a new dungeon appeared in the forest. Apparently, it was a dungeon where the goddess Rudia sealed one of the 7 great demon lords. And the dark elf, who was a servant of the demon king, was greatly enhanced by the miasmas that flowed from the ground and decided to show his aggression. Alt became agitated when he heard about one of the 7 great demon lords, for this creature had incredible power and could bring many troubles. Tio explained that it was indeed a demon king named Belphegor, and he was the younger brother of Lucifer, king of demons of the world, and therefore has incredible strength and power. It was known from ancient legends that Belphegor lost his brother Lucifer to the goddess Rudia, and therefore hated her. Also, Belphegor was in a quarrel with his brother, who eventually betrayed the demon king. The elven people were descendants of the goddess Rudia, and the dark elf was a descendant of Belphegor. Alt didn't know for sure if the 2 races were originally incompatible, but in the end, the demon king Belphegor was defeated by Lucifer and sealed by the goddess Rudia. However, the current situation may have changed everything. As it turned out, the dark elves targeted Princess Tio, determined to destroy her and end the existence of her kind, which was more than 2,000 years old. Tio explained that she was very scared and decided to tell the story because she trusted Mr. Alt. The young lord promised the girl that he would not tell the story to anyone and would keep it a secret until Tio wanted to tell it herself. The elven girl explained that the key to breaking the seal of the demon king Belphegor is the blood of the elven royal family, and that is why they want to kill her and use her blood. If her blood can be spilled on Belphegor's sarcophagus, it can resurrect the demon king. Tio also told that in her country there is a rule that the royal family must commit suicide, so she must not allow the dark elves to take her blood. However, even under the threat of the dark elves, an unforeseen thing happened that broke all the rules. Tio's parents didn't let her die, but didn't want their beloved daughter to survive and try to live a happy life, and so she was able to escape during a terrible attack by the dark elves. Tio confessed that she really wanted to die with her parents because she was very scared and sad to be alone in this horrible world. She cried and said that she felt miserable at that moment because she could not help her parents, but only ran away, realizing that she would never see them alive again. Just some time ago she was in these lands and tried to hide from her pursuers. Alt listened to the girl's story and realized why she was attacked in the forest and tried to calm the elf. The guy said that of course it was very difficult for the princess to survive all these dangers, but the most important thing is that she survived and is now safe. Alt promised that the girl would be fine as long as she was in this village. After all, no one will be able to get to her, neither monsters nor dark elves, and he is confident in the protection created by Gain. Tio admired the young lord's confidence and then explained, being in this settlement could bring terrible trouble, and so she was still unsure whether she should continue to obey her parents' orders. But Alt explained that it was nonsense, and if the dark elf's goal was just to defeat the other elves, Tio's death could certainly solve the problem. But they have a different goal, and they need blood. Also, the young lord was outraged at the possibility of an attack on his territory and promised that he would do his best to protect the elf princess. Alt explained to the girl that she has nothing to worry about, because the defense of the settlement is good enough and all friends will help her not to worry about anything, and not to forget that the goddess Rudia was with them. Alt decided that if the supreme god of the elves is the goddess of fertility, then his village should be the perfect place for Princess Tio. And if the dark elves dared to attack, Tio could rest assured that she was perfectly safe and no one could get to her. Alt promised to unite all its inhabitants who would fight together and protect the elf princess. Tio was delighted by the young lord's words and hugged the boy in gratitude and then called him the messenger of the goddess Rudia. Alt was frightened by the jealousy of the fertility goddess and asked the elfess to stop hugging him immediately. At that moment the doors of the room opened and Alt realized that he was about to feel Rudia's wrath. But this time the fertility goddess cried out that there was trouble. Rudia shouted that their settlement had been attacked by the dark elves and they needed to retaliate immediately. The attack was indeed fierce and many areas of the village were already ablaze with fire. The leader of the attacking elves told his troops that the goddess Rudia had made them responsible for keeping the seal of the Demon King, and so they should get the life of Princess Tio. Watching the invaders, Alt and Rudia suddenly realized that the reason these aggressive creatures attacked the village was the goddess of fertility herself. At that moment, arrows flew towards the village and Alt ordered Rudia to duck immediately, as it was getting more dangerous by the second. But the fertility goddess shouted to the elves that she was Rudia, and demanded that they stop the attack immediately. Rudia screamed that this settlement was a love nest for her and Mr. Alta, and therefore the village must not be destroyed. But the elves of course did not hear these cries and continued to destroy everything in their path. Then when the elves did hear the cries of the fertility goddess, they did not believe her words and decided that the foolish woman could not be Rudia. The enraged elves demanded to give the princess to Tio immediately so they could use her blood to do the ritual. Rudia stopped trying to shout to the elves and started hiding under a hail of arrows. Alt couldn't stand to see his village being destroyed by the minute, and used Divine Flame to destroy the arrows. But the elf leader ordered to attack the settlement with fireballs instead of arrows to burn this village of sinful people to the ground. Alt tried to shout to the elf leader and explain that he was the master of the place and just wanted to talk. But the evil elf was not going to negotiate and called Alt a messenger of the demon lord, who makes even goblins obey. Meanwhile, the defenders of the village were in a difficult position and could no longer hold back the furious attacks. Kuzua tried her best to help and save the village from the devastating fire. Thanks to her hot springs, Kuzua was able to save many goblins from the fire, although the water was too hot, and this did not please the defenders of the village too much. But the goddess of hot springs explained that it was better to bathe in hot water than to be burned in fire. Then dipped in the magic water, goblins felt an incredible surge of strength and decided to attack the elves. Alt asked his subordinates not to kill the elves, but only to try to neutralize them. But the adventurer Gain disagreed and called it madness, because the elves are real masters of archery and can use battle magic, and if they don't take some decisive action immediately, they could all die. Alt agreed with the words of the experienced adventurer, who understood battle tactics better than the others. Alt wondered if the divine dragon Bahamut could silence the elves, who were driven by a strong sense of duty. But at that moment, Rudia advised him to use God Gacha's ability, for Alt was able to accumulate 5 magic stones. The young lord thought it was a great idea and decided to heed the advice. A few seconds later, the unique ability activated and the elves were blinded by a huge pillar of magical light, which was to help the young lord save his settlement. Alt was eagerly waiting for the summoning to be completed and really hoped that it would help solve the problem with the attack. This time, they managed to summon a giant soldier to help, who instantly activated his master's enemy annihilation mode. The huge soldier was ready to destroy any creature that dared to threaten the man who had summoned him to this world. The soldier turned to Alta and offered to order him to immediately attack the enemies. The giant soldier promised to destroy every elf, but Alt asked to wait for a while and realized that some of this soldier's abilities would transfer to him. Such a skill turned out to be the ability to use stun arrows, and this interested the young lord. Alt asked if the soldier could disarm all the enemies without killing them. The soldier didn't quite understand what was wanted of him and said that anyone who went against his master could become a slave to him for the rest of his life. But Alt replied that this was not what he wanted. Eventually, the huge soldier realized what they wanted from him and reconfigured the extermination modes to non-lethal disarming mode. But the leader of the Dark Elves was not going to give up and tried to attack Alta with a magical thunder arrow. But at that moment, a huge soldier activated a barrier against magic that was able to repel any attack and protect Alta. The magic thunder arrow was neutralized and the Dark Elves tried to attack the soldier with bows, but immediately realized that the adamantium armor was absolutely invulnerable to their arrows. The soldier offered the elves to surrender within 10 seconds or they would face certain death. The elves were frightened and did not know how to resist such a monster of metal. Then the huge soldier started a countdown to the total destruction of the Dark Elves, but Alt reminded again that they must not be killed. But the soldier explained that the opponents would not die, but the non-lethal mode would cause them such pain that would seem worse than death. Continuing the report, the metal soldier said that soon the elves would feel the full fury and would thrash in agony from the terrible pain, and eventually ask for a quick death themselves. One of the elves decided that it was just a game and ordered to immediately attack the monster with increased concentration of magic. But the huge soldier foresaw this option and instantly activated suppression with a stun arrow that immediately neutralized the opponents. Some elves who were fighting in another part of the settlement noticed a bright flash and wondered what it could be. The effect of the magical stun arrows was amazing. All the elves who were affected fell to the ground and could no longer resist. In the end, a huge soldier reported that there were no dead among the enemies and the master's request had been fulfilled. Goddess Rudia rejoiced at this success and called the giant soldier a very useful assistant. Alt decided to personally check the condition of the elves and made sure that all of them were alive and unconscious. Gain was delighted by the incredible power of the huge soldier and praised him for his strength. Alt, meanwhile, was pondering how he should proceed, and Princess Tio asked if he was alright. Alt asked the elf not to go outside, because it could be dangerous here. The girl admitted that she was very frightened, and then apologized that all this destruction was because of her. Tio was horrified by the destruction in the village and explained that she could use her healing magic to help the wounded. Just then, a local girl asked for help and said that her father had been badly wounded by an arrow and was not breathing. There was indeed a man lying nearby in a very bad condition. Everyone decided that it was too late to help the man and that he was already in heaven. The girl was distressed and cried a lot. Princess Tio was shocked by the man's death, and some of the locals began to accuse the elven woman of causing all these troubles. The angry crowd was ready to attack the elf, but Alt ordered everyone to calm down and said that the girl was not guilty of anything. The locals were eager to kill the princess and demanded that Alt get out of their way. In the meantime, a dark elf lurked in a tree nearby and decided to kill the village head with an accurate shot. But at the last moment before the shot, the white wolf warned his master of the danger. The arrow whizzed within a centimeter of Alt's head and the dark elfess burst into curses against the white wolf. Alt instantly used the stun arrow skill and managed to neutralize the archer in the tree, and then ordered the locals to calm down immediately. The young lord explained that Princess Tio was on their side and had come to help, so she couldn't be blamed for the dark elves attacking them. But the locals were sorry for the dead man and that it was impossible to help him. But at that moment the goddess Rudia decided to intervene in the situation and help resurrect the man. The goddess of fertility began to prepare for the resurrection ritual, and Tio was once again convinced that it was the supreme goddess of the elves. Alt expressed his gratitude to the goddess and hoped that she could help in this situation. A few seconds later, the goddess of fertility used her power and called upon the drop of the world tree, which would bring the dead man back to life. A bright warm light enveloped the dead man and everyone present held their breath waiting for the miracle. The next moment the dead man began to breathe, and then opened his eyes and asked if he had fallen asleep at such a crucial moment. The joyful daughter immediately started hugging her father, who did not really understand anything. Rudia was quite the result and enjoyed everyone's attention, and the elven princess was surprised to see the ability of the world tree drop, which she had read about very often in ancient legends. Tio was finally convinced that there was a real fertility goddess in front of her and declared that Rudia was the supreme goddess of all elves. Rudia reminded her that she had indeed said so many times that she was the true goddess. Meanwhile, the dark elf who had fallen from the tree came to her senses and growled in anger. The elf tried to reach for a weapon and attack the villagers, but at that moment the giant soldier neutralized the threat with a stun arrow. After that, the young lord decided to bring the giant soldier back, and in a few seconds he had a new card in his hand, thanks to which he could summon this invincible soldier at any time. Alt was happy that he was able to use his unique skill to save all the villagers again and repel the attack of the dark elves. The captured elves asked the young lord what he was going to do with them. Goddess Rudia, smiling sweetly, promised the captives to bathe them in the boiling water of a hot spring, and after such a pleasure they might be allowed to drink milk. The dark elves began to pray and ask for help from the goddess Rudia, completely unaware that she was in front of them. But Alt decided to calm the captives and explained that bathing in the hot spring will help to cure wounds and take away pain, so they should not worry about their fate. The young lord also offered the captives to enjoy the local food and finally realized that there were no enemies for them here. Alt stated that he had no intention of feuding with the dark elf people and wanted to talk quietly during the meal. Rudia offered the captives to taste freshly baked bread with fragrant sweet honey. Then Princess Tio addressed the elves and explained that she had been attacked by a dark elf in the forest, and only thanks to Lord Alta she had escaped death. The princess admitted that she had indeed broken the rules and survived, and so perhaps her words make no sense to all the elves. But one must believe Alta, for he will indeed be a good ally for the elven people. And now with the help of Mr. Alt, all the elves can collectively prevent the Demon King from being resurrected. And then the rebirth of the great elven kingdom will definitely happen. Princess Tio really spoke sincerely and eventually asked the elves to follow her once more. The elves believed the young princess and decided to try to rebuild the great kingdom under Tio's rule. But then the elves began to resent the fact that the people of this settlement were hiring some foolish girl who pretended to be the great goddess Rudia. These words angered the goddess of fertility, and she roared with anger. Rudia began to ask the elves why they still did not believe that she was a real goddess and why she had not proved it with her abilities. In the end, the princess of the elves intervened and explained that she had personally witnessed a miracle, which was described in ancient legends, and in front of them was really the great goddess of fertility. And it was Mr. Alt who was able to call Rudia into this world to help him rule this land. And the ability to drop the world tree belongs to the two of them. Rudoria began to explain to the elves that she really can heal any wounds and resurrect a dead person, since she possesses the ability of the drop of the world tree. If someone does not believe her, she can demonstrate it. The young elf who tried to kill Alta stated that she had indeed seen a miracle with her own eyes, and this girl is actually a fertility goddess. Rudia then urged all elves to continue to follow their law and not to forget that the gods do not sit idle either and are ready to help in a difficult situation. The goddess of fertility reminded that by the covenant of the god Gacha all the gods have restored their power thanks to donations, and soon they are going to descend to the earth again. Therefore, all believing elves must pay for Gacha's patronage and save the world together with Mr. Alt. And in the end, they will all be able to resist any enemies together. Such an outstanding speech delighted the elves present, and they truly believed that a real fertility goddess was standing before them. In the end, the elves apologized for their attack and expressed their deepest gratitude to Her Royal Highness Princess Tio for her help and promised to follow her wherever she went. The goddess of fertility then turned to the elves and reminded them of her order to prevent the resurrection of the demon king Belphegor, and then explained that there was another very important thing besides royal blood. Rudia stated that there is a servant of Belphegor and there is a grave danger from him as well. The fertility goddess explained that the demon king's servant should eventually become the vessel for his resurrection, and so it would be a good idea to get rid of him. Rudia then explained that Belphegor is a demon lord whose source of energy is laziness. He loves idiots who envy and hate others because of their lazy habit of not making any effort to achieve a goal. And so it must be understood that a specially chosen person can try to resurrect the Demon King at any time to break the seal that restrains him. And unfortunately, they may not be able to resist. But the elf reminds us that the ritual still requires royal blood. Alt realized that the elves were specifically following the princess, and now want to get permission to go to the dungeon where the Demon King Belphegor is. The young lord promised to show help and protect the princess along with the elves, and this pleased and inspired the elven commander. Alt explained that they must neutralize the man who would become the servant of the Demon King and not allow him to come near the sealed land. Therefore, they need to protect two things. The elf commanders thanked for the help and promised to protect the Demon King's seal. Soon the evening came and Alt thought about his dream of creating a utopia, and so the resurrection of the Demon King was not to take place. The young lord gazed dreamily into the sky and imagined how he would create a utopia where everyone could live and rejoice. Monsters, humans, and other races would be able to live happily together under his leadership. Also, Alt thought that if he could team up with the Dark Elves, that was great. But if the Demon King Belphegor was resurrected, the creation of a new better world would be jeopardized. Alt decided but to use all her powers and abilities to protect her dream and her friends. After all, everyone in this world deserves swashbuckling and peace of mind. Meanwhile, the goddess of fertility explained to the elves that at the moment she was happy to be near Mr. Alt, with whom she did not get along in her past life. Alt was interested in the girl's words and asked her to tell him more about her past life. Rudia calmly explained that in fact, in his past life, Alt had been the Demon King Lucifer, and if he tried hard enough, he could remember all the events of those times. This came as a shock, for he couldn't even imagine that in his past life he was a creature that threatened all living things. But Rudia explained that it was because of this that he was able to make the goblins follow him so easily. But the boy refused to believe it, and declared that he was just an ordinary human. The goddess of fertility continued to assure that the monsters love Alta and follow him because he was the strongest demon lord in his past life and his name was Lucifer. The elves were surprised by this news and immediately remembered the legend in which Lucifer was the lover of the goddess Rudia. But Alt continued to refuse to believe it and said that it was some kind of mistake. Rudia thought about her words and asked Alt to try to remember what he knew about the Demon King Lucifer, and perhaps he would be able to recall past memories. But in any case, the Demon King Belphegor could bring a lot of trouble and suffering, and so Alt should be prepared for difficulties. And if Alt can use the power of his past life, then he will definitely bring back the memories of his boundless love for Rudia. Alt certainly understood the true motives of the fertility goddess, and now it was even harder for him to get rid of her attention. But despite all the surprises, the young lord was glad to be able to cooperate with the elves, especially since he had finally managed to calm Princess Tio. But the goddess of fertility was happiest of all and asked what they would do next. After a little thought, Alt answered that they should increase the number of settlers, because it would be good to increase the income of the settlement and start developing production. Princess Tio suggested to start producing the legendary sweets of the elf tribe, which she once gave to the goddess Rudia a long time ago. This made the fertility goddess really excited, and she exclaimed that she remembered that delicious taste. The girls were confident that the elven sweets would definitely bring the settlement a huge amount of money, which could then be invested in activating the god Gacha's ability. Meanwhile, Count Austin invited the maid Lilin to his office for a conversation and wanted to entrust her with an important task. The elderly count reminded the girl that she was very close to his son Alt. Lilin did not deny the obvious things and confessed that she had indeed always considered Mr. Alt as her master, not Namakel. As a result, the worried count explained to the girl that he would like to ask her to go immediately to a remote province and visit Alt to deliver an important letter to him. Count Austin admitted that he was wrong and blind, and his second son, the tamer of the royal palace Namakel, turned out to be a useless man. He has no hope, because of his inaction the monster injured Princess Anne and also failed to tame the dragon. Such a terrible situation in the palace is used by unscrupulous people and steal the royal money. And the monsters in the royal palace are full of discontent and can get out of control at any time. Count Austin exclaimed that if this continues, he will have a heart attack and will not live to a ripe old age, and the Austin family will cease to exist. The count could not contain his emotions and admitted that he had made a terrible mistake and banished Alta, who was the most suitable person to be the head of the family. Therefore, if it was possible, he would very much like to see Alta's achievements recognized in the capital of the kingdom, and he would take his well-deserved place. Count Austin explained to the maid that he will be able to take care of the monsters on his behalf for a while, but unfortunately it won't last long. Therefore, there is no other choice but to try to bring Alta back and hand over the position of the head of the family to him. Lilin thoughtfully looked at the letter and agreed to fulfill this task, and of course she could guess what the message was about. The count repeated that he would be happy if Alt inherited the Austin family and then justice would be served. Lilin timidly asked what would happen if Mr. Alt refused to accept the offer. Count Austin sighed heavily and asked the girl to do everything in her power to convince Alt to return home and take over as head of the family. But Lilin was uncertain that she would be able to fulfill this request, although of course Mr. Alt was very fond of the monsters in the royal palace and still have a chance to convince him to return. The elderly count then told the maid that a few days ago, Mr. Alt had sent him a carrier pigeon, and it was a good sign. There was something marvelous written in this message. Alt reported that he had managed to save the elven princess Tio from death and had an alliance with her. Also, Alt reported in the letter that the elven magic technology was provided as proof of the friendship between the two nations. And if it really turns out to be true, this event could be considered a historical feat, for elves are better at using magic than humans. The count explained that the kingdom had for many years been in desperate need of a new technology that was only available to elves. However, the elves had always hated humans and never wanted to have diplomatic relations with them. The stealthy elves were always in the forest with a magical barrier, and so it was impossible to even steal their technology. Maid Lilin was delighted with Mr. Alta's accomplishments and once again convinced that he was an outstanding human being. But then Count Austin confessed that he could sense how angry Alt was at him and hardly wanted to socialize. Also, one cannot deny the probability that Alt-U will want to break all ties and monopolize elven technology, and all profits made with it. Lilin continued to listen attentively to the count, although she did not fully understand all the political nuances. But suddenly the conversation was interrupted by an angry Namakel, who suddenly burst into the room. Count Austin was surprised by his son's appearance, and Namakel stated that he had heard the entire conversation about how his father wanted to put the exiled Alta as head of the family. Namakel demanded that he had not, and explained to his father that he was currently negotiating to hire an experienced assassin as his bodyguard. If these negotiations were successful, he could easily tame the dragon and solve all problems. But the elderly count replied that it was all a mistake, and the dragon tamer skill is not a skill that allows you to tame any dragon unconditionally. And Namakel's success in taming a dragon largely depended on his basic monster tamer skills, and that was why he failed to tame the divine dragon Bahamut. Namakel roared with anger and asked that if he with his level 1 monster tamer skill couldn't tame a dragon, The Count calmly replied that it was most likely so, and that was the wrong way to go about it. And now, under no circumstances would Namakel be able to tame a powerful dragon that would help tame the royal monsters. And if they continue on this erroneous path, the Austen family would cease to exist. The Earl then asked Namakel to accept his defeat and ask for his siblings' forgiveness so that they could all work together to restore their family's standing. But Namakel couldn't accept his defeat and hit the table and said that he was hundreds of times better than his brother and God Gatcha's ability was a completely useless skill, and he was the one who deserved to be the head of the family. Because of the impact on the table, the elderly Count's papers fell to the floor, which turned out to be pictures of beautiful young girls. Namakel began to mock his father and stated that was he really so eager for Alta's return, only to feel at ease and continue having fun with young girls. The Count shouted back that he had been looking out for the welfare of his family since he was a child and therefore deserved a proper vacation. And there is nothing wrong with living all day surrounded by beautiful young girls who will adorn his old age. Lilina, who witnessed the Count's quarrel with his son and also learned about the strange inclinations of the master of the house, was surprised and embarrassed at the same time and therefore wanted to travel as soon as possible to a distant land to meet with Mr. Alt. Meanwhile, the adventuress Rin and her wounded brother approached the entrance to the forest in Silesia because they wanted to get to the village ruled by Mr. Alt as soon as possible. But the girl was very tired and could not go any further. The adventurer then asked his sister why she was so upset. Rin explained that she hated Namakel Austen very much and it was the first time she felt like this, because he was the reason they were in such a difficult situation. Zen replied that many nobles do unfair things to adventurers and unfortunately it was very hard to deal with. Rin looked at her wounded brother with pain in her heart and didn't know how to help him. But then suddenly some strange rustling was heard and Rin noticed the approach of flying dragons that could attack at any moment. The young sorceress tried to use a blizzard spell, but unfortunately Rin's magical ability didn't work against the monsters and the dragons were able to repel her magic. Zen realized that there was no way he could help his sister and ordered me to run away immediately and leave him here. But the girl replied that there was no way she would do anything to her brother and that was not why they had been recruiting here for so many days. But suddenly the flying dragons were attacked by magical flames and Rin immediately recognized the sacred dragon Bahamut who was protecting them. And then a huge white wolf appeared nearby and was rapidly approaching. Alt asked the adventurers if they were all right, but the young sorceress felt a surge of anger, for she thought she was facing the villain Namakel Austen. Alt immediately explained that he had been mistaken for his younger brother and that he had not seen Namakel for a long time. Meanwhile, Bahamut reported the approach of a huge number of flying dragons that feed on humans and offered to destroy them immediately with his fire breath. But the young lord asked Bahamut not to kill the dragons, for it would be a good idea to tame them and take them into his service. The divine dragon listened to his master's words and decided to attack his opponents and try to neutralize them. Bahamut of course proved to be much stronger than any flying dragons and very quickly dispatched them with his powerful blows. The ordinary flying dragons, after several unsuccessful attacks, realized that they could not stand up to Bahamut and tried to fly away. But Bahamut was able to neutralize many of the dragons with his powerful blows, which fell to the ground and could no longer move. Rin was fascinated by what she saw and continued to fear the divine dragon. Then the girl rushed to help her wounded brother, and Alt noticed how badly the adventurer was hurt. And judging by his pale complexion, he had lost a lot of blood. Rin shouted that this wound was caused by the involvement of the cursed Namakel Austen. The girl explained that since Alt is Namakel Austen's sibling, he should know that they accompanied Namakel to the Purgatory dungeon during his mission to tame the divine dragon. And then, through Namakel's fault, they found themselves in mortal danger and barely escaped death. In doing so, Lord Namakel mistreated all adventurers and eventually failed to tame the dragon Bahamut. And after that, Zen had to carry Namakel on his back because he was foolishly injured. And then on the way back to the capital of the kingdom, they were attacked by a terrible monster. But as it turned out, the vile Lord Namakel blamed the adventurers for the failure of their mission, and they were forced to disband their group. Rin, despite her brother's pleas to calm down, continued to blame Namakel, who turned out to be an irresponsible and despicable man. But Zen asked his sister to be quiet and explained that failure is inevitable in any mission and he, as the leader of the team, is responsible for the wounds and does not want to blame anyone. Zen then apologized to Alt for his sister's emotions and explained that they just wanted to get to the settlement. Zen admitted that they had heard about the existence of hot springs that could effectively cure all wounds and diseases. And if Mr. Alt knew the right way to this village, it would be a good idea to get his help. Bahamut took a close look at the adventurers and said that he remembered these people who had protected the foolish lord in the cave trying to display his dragon tamer abilities. The divine dragon explained to the adventurers that they had chosen a very unfortunate mission, and they were lucky to get out alive from behind his shelter. But now they could be calm, because they had met the noble Mr. Alt, who would surely help them. Unexpectedly, Alt knelt before the adventurers and apologized for the actions of his foolish brother who had defamed the name from the family. Alt offered to help immediately and try to heal the wounds. Upon examining the injuries, Alt decided that it was probably the poison of a deadly jellyfish, which would normally be treated with a special elixir. But Alt asked the adventurers to calm down and promised that everything would be alright soon. The young lord instantly used his unique world tree drop skill, and the warm enveloping light gradually began to heal the wounds. In a few seconds, all the wounds on the adventurer's body were gone and he felt healthy. Zen asked in surprise that Mr. Alt had spent a very expensive elixir for a simple commoner like him. But Alt explained that he didn't use any elixir and used his unique skill of World Tree Drop. And this unique ability of Goddess Rudia can cure any disease wound. And this ability can be used once every 3 days, which means there is nothing to worry about. Zen asked how he could thank for such help and then explained that they were actually adventurers from the royal capital, and by fate, together with his sister ended up in these places. But Alt replied that there was no need to worry about thanking him, because he wanted to apologize for his brother's actions, so they were even. Zen then went on to thank Alt and Bahamut for helping them defend themselves against the flying dragons and saving their lives. Alt asked if he understood correctly that Zen and Rin were S-rank adventurers from the Wolves of Dawn team. Zen explained that at the moment it was just a decorative title and meant nothing, because even if his wounds healed, he would still not be able to return to the royal capital, so all ranks were irrelevant. Bahamut was ahead of his master and informed him that it was quite convenient, because they were just looking for adventurers, and especially those who knew how to use magic and were willing to cooperate. Zen and Rin were surprised at such an unexpected offer and pondered their response. After Alt returned to the village with his new adventurer friends, it was time to create culinary masterpieces. The sorceress Rin was surprised and confused by the outfit that the goddess Rudia had provided her, and wasn't quite sure what she was supposed to do in the kitchen. But Alt advised not to worry and to listen to Princess Tio, who promised to teach everyone how to cook wonderful elven sweets. In the end, it was decided to prepare wonderful elf ice cream, sweet cocktails, and beautiful biscuits. There was joy and laughter in the kitchen. Rin was puzzled, for it had been a long time since she had seen such joyful and happy people, and she sincerely wanted to stay here forever.